Section 1. The show behind the show. There is something deeply strange about a cartoon that has been running for over 2 decades and still manages to hide things in plain sight. You have watched this show. Maybe you grew up with it. Maybe it played in the background of 100 different nights, that familiar, brassy theme song drifting through a room while you ate dinner on the couch, or fell half asleep somewhere around episode 3 of a late-night marathon. You know these characters in the intimate, bone-deep way. You know things that have been part of your life since childhood. You know the specific rhythm of Peter's voice right before he does something catastrophically stupid. You know the particular tilt of Stewie's head when he is considering something dangerous. You know the exact quality of Brian's silence when he is about to say something cutting and well-deserved. You know all of this. And yet, if you sit with Family Guy long enough, if you really press your face close to the glass of it and look at the details instead of the jokes, you start to notice things that do not add up. Patterns that feel too deliberate to be accidents. Moments that carry a weight that comedy has no business carrying. Threads that, pulled gently and with patience, unravel into something considerably darker than a network animated sitcom about a fat man in Rhode Island has any right to contain. This is a video about those threads. Over the next several hours, we are going to move through some of the most carefully constructed, deeply unsettling, and genuinely thought-provoking fan theories ever assembled around one show. Some of these theories emerged on Reddit in the early 2010s and went viral years later, reaching new audiences who experienced them as a genuine shock to their relationship with something they thought they knew completely. Others have been living quietly on fan wikis and anonymous message boards, passed from person to person by fans who noticed something off in the corner of an episode and could not let the feeling go. A few of them are so well constructed, so internally consistent, so precise in the way they fit against the actual content of the show, that they genuinely change how the show feels when you watch it afterward, even knowing they were never officially intended. Before we go any further, one thing needs to be said clearly. None of these theories are confirmed by the show's creators. Seth MacFarlane and his writing team have not endorsed any of these readings. The show was built by human beings who were, for most of its run, primarily concerned with landing jokes at the right moment and meeting a weekly broadcast deadline, and it is unlikely they were encoding a unified hidden narrative across 20-plus seasons with the precision these theories require. What fan theories do is something different and something legitimate in its own right. They take a text, any text, a novel, a film, a television show, and ask what it would mean if certain things were true. They are exercises in what a story is capable of containing, whether the author intended the container or not. And Family Guy, for all its reputation as a frenetic, anarchic, deliberately shallow comedy, contains more than it appears to. The theories we will explore tonight draw out what is already there. They just draw it out into the light. We will start with the theory that rewrites the entire show from its very first frame. The one that went viral on TikTok in 2022, with people telling each other to look it up in a tone that sounded less like sharing a fun internet discovery and more like sharing something they needed someone else to carry with them. A theory so stark and so emotionally precise that it has stuck around for over a decade, because every few years a new group of people finds it and needs to tell someone about what it does to the way the show feels. The theory about what is actually wrong with Peter Griffin, not the animated Peter, the real one, the one underneath the cartoon, the one who may be sitting very still somewhere we never see, building a world inside his mind because the real world offered him something too heavy to survive intact. Get comfortable. Let things get quiet around you. These stories are patient. They will unfold at whatever pace you need them to. After this first section, drop a comment. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is. That information genuinely makes a difference to how these videos feel, to make knowing that someone in Auckland is listening at 3 in the morning while it rains, or that someone in Canada is settling in after a long shift, or that someone in a city I have never heard of found this at exactly the right moment. So if you have a moment, tell me. And if you are not already subscribed, this would be a good time to do that. It does not cost anything, and it means you will hear about what comes next. Section 2. Peter Griffin is not who he thinks he is, the insanity theory. Picture a man in a room. Not the living room on Spooner Street, not the green couch, not the television, not the smell of whatever Lois is cooking drifting in from the kitchen. A different room. Smaller. The walls a neutral, institutional color that the light does not quite brighten. sounds from somewhere outside, muffled by distance and material, arriving like things happening in another world. The particular stillness of a place where people spend a great deal of time being very quiet about what they are actually thinking. Picture a man in that room, sitting, very still, not vacant, not absent from himself. His mind is fully engaged. It is just elsewhere, in a version of Rhode Island that is brighter and louder and more forgiving than wherever he actually is. That man is Peter Griffin, not the cartoon, the one underneath the cartoon, the one at the center of the most widely shared, most emotionally devastating fan theory in the show's history. First posted to the Reddit fan theories community in 2012 by a user called B-blank0308. The theory sat gathering quiet agreement for years before exploding onto TikTok in 2022, where video after video told viewers to look it up with an urgency that was more confessional than promotional. People were not just sharing something clever, they were sharing something that had gotten into them, something that changed the shape of the show for them, retroactively, so that watching it afterward felt different from watching it before, heavier and stranger, and somehow more tender in the way that things become tender when you understand the grief underneath them. Here is the theory in its essential form. The world of Family Guy, every episode, every cutaway, every absurd adventure, every ordinary Sunday in that house with the teal roof does not exist. It is happening inside the fractured, desperately protective mind of a man who has lost his entire family and cannot live in the reality of that loss. Every character the show presents is a reconstruction. Every storyline is wish fulfillment. Every joke is grief wearing comedy's clothes because grief will wear anything that makes it possible to keep going. The man in the room is holding the whole thing together with the force of his refusal to accept what actually happened, and the show you have been watching for years is what the inside of that refusal looks like. The story of how he got there begins with Meg. In the real world, the one that exists beneath the animated surface, Meg Griffin was not the awkward, pink hat-wearing, perpetually unloved teenager the show presents her as. She was beautiful and popular in the specific way that teenage girls who are also genuinely kind tend to be popular. She moved through her high school life with ease and confidence, and the most important thing about her was not her social standing, but the relationship she had with her younger brother, Chris. Because in the real world, Chris Griffin had been deprived of oxygen at birth. Not a catastrophic deprivation, but enough of one to leave him with an intellectual disability that made ordinary life harder for him than it was for most people. And Meg, who loved him with the kind of fierce, uncomplicated love that older siblings sometimes develop for younger siblings who need more protecting, had taken on the work of looking out for him as something close to a calling. One night, Meg took Chris to a party. The theory does not belabor the specifics of how it happened. The important thing is what happened after. On the drive home, there was alcohol in Meg's system and a crash on a dark road, and both Meg and Chris were killed. Just like that, the two people who had defined the warm, possible future of the Griffin family, the daughter who was going to be someone, the son she had loved enough to spend herself on, gone in the same moment, in the same car, on the same road. Lois was pregnant at the time, pregnant with a child who would have been named Stewie. The grief of losing two children at once, in that way, was something she could not survive with herself intact. She took her own life while still carrying the pregnancy. The child who would have been Stewie died with her, never having existed in any form that Peter could know directly. And then Peter was alone, in a house that had held his whole life, surrounded by the specific, horrible absence of people who had been there so recently and so fully that their absence had shape and weight. A man with no particular resources for grief, whose whole emotional architecture had been built around his family rather than himself, now without the family. The mind, faced with this, did what some minds do in extremity. It chose not to be there for it. It built somewhere else to be instead. The world of Family Guy is that somewhere else. Everything in it is a reconstruction from the materials of Peter's love and guilt. Lois is in it because he needed her to be in it, because losing her was part of the catastrophe, and the mind could not hold the catastrophe, and so reinserted her into the world it was building, warm and present, and occasionally exasperated with him in the specific way she always had been. Meg is in it, and this is where the theory reaches for something genuinely painful, because Peter could not let her go, but his grief and his guilt and his rage at what she did that night have to go somewhere, and in the world his mind has constructed, they go on to Meg herself. Every time Peter on the show treats Meg with contempt, every time he acts as though she is barely worth acknowledging, every moment of inexplicable cruelty that the show has always struggled to justify with comedy alone. That is the guilt and the anger bleeding through. He loves her. Some part of him will always love the real Meg, the beautiful, popular, kind girl who took her brother to parties because she wanted him to have the things she had. But another part of him, the part that could not be in the room when they told him what happened on that road, blames her for everything. And in a world built to be survivable, the blame goes where he cannot quite let the love go, because to fully hate her would be to fully lose her, and to fully love her would be to fully feel what losing her meant. This is why Meg's treatment in the show has always felt slightly off, in a way that pure comedy cannot account for. It is too sustained, too personal, too specific in its cruelty to be the casual laziness of a writing room that has run out of things to do with a character. It is the specific cruelty of unprocessed grief, of a mind that loves something and cannot forgive it at the same time. Chris, in Peter's reconstruction, retains the intellectual limitations of the real Chris. Peter cannot idealize away something he loved about his son. The reality of Chris, as he was, the specific way his mind worked, is part of what Peter is trying to hold on to by building this world. So, Chris in the cartoon is still the slower, kinder, more easily confused version of himself, because that is who the real Chris was, and Peter's love for him is too specific to blur. Stewie is the most complex reconstruction of all. Peter never met the child Lois was carrying. There was no information to draw from. No memories, no personality, no face. Just the knowledge that there was supposed to be another person, and there is not one, and the particular anguish of an absence that never even had the chance to become a presence. So Peter filled the absence with pure potential. He made Stewie into everything a child could theoretically be. The most intelligent, the most capable, the most startling. A baby with the mind of a genius and the bearing of a villain, and the capacity to build machines that the show's best engineers could not have conceived of. This is what Peter imagined for his unborn son, the fullest possible version of what a person might become, given everything Peter wanted for his children and everything his real children never fully got the chance to be. And Stewie hates Lois, plots against her, schemes for her destruction with the focus and dedication of someone whose entire inner life has been organized around this purpose. The theory reads this as one of the most devastating details in the whole construction. Peter's subconscious fury at his wife for leaving him, for choosing to exit the situation rather than stay and grieve alongside him, expressed through the only vessel available. He cannot hate her consciously. In the constructed world, she is warm and alive and making dinner, and he needs that too much to lose it again. But Stewie can hate her. Stewie is the part of Peter that cannot forgive her for what she did, and Stewie never stops trying to destroy her, episode after episode, season after season, because that part of Peter never stops being furious. Brian in the real world is most likely a dog, just a dog, an animal who keeps Peter company in whatever facility he is living in, or who visits with Cleveland and Quagmire on the days they come to sit with him. In the constructed world, Peter has made Brian into everything a companion could be: articulate, thoughtful, capable of the kind of conversation that a genuinely isolated person craves. A friend who is always there, who can always be talked to, who meets Peter at whatever level his fractured mind is operating at on a given day. The Brian of the show is the ideal version of the comfort that the real Brian the dog provides just by being present. Cleveland and Quagmire visit. In the real world, they come and they sit with him and they talk, the way friends do when one of their number has gone somewhere that cannot be followed entirely. In the constructed world, they are the bar friends, the companions in every adventure, because Peter cannot imagine a version of his life without them. Their presence is so essential to his understanding of what his life is supposed to look like that he builds them into everything. Joe Swanson, who the theory suggests Peter may never have actually known well, was described to him during these visits a strong, capable, heroic neighbor who embodied everything Peter had wanted to be as a man and as a father. Peter built Joe from the description, built him and put him next door, as an avatar of the self Peter had hoped to become, now living in permanent proximity as a reminder of the distance between what Peter imagined for himself and what he actually managed. The Cleveland show, in the most elaborate version of this theory, represents a period when Cleveland's visits became less frequent, when Peter's most regular and attentive friend dropped out of the rotation for a sustained stretch. The constructed world explained his absence by spinning off an entire separate world for Cleveland to live in a whole other show, a whole other life happening somewhere else, because the alternative, Simply having Cleveland vanish from the narrative without explanation was too much like losing someone again. And Peter has already lost too many people to afford losing them in the constructed world too. What gives this theory its particular quality of disturb, the quality that makes it stick after you encounter it, that changes the ambient feeling of the show in your memory, is how many otherwise inexplicable things about Family Guy it explains. The absence of permanent consequences. The way the show always resets. The way characters survive things that should permanently damage them and are fine again next episode. In a world built to be survivable, nothing can be allowed to stick. Nothing can be permitted to accumulate into genuine, irrevocable loss. Because the whole point of the constructed world is that it is a place where the unbearable thing has not happened. Where the road was just a road and Meg and Chris came home and Lois is in the kitchen and the house is full. Every time the show comes close to allowing something to be permanent, Brian's death being the most famous example, there is a mechanism to reverse it. Because the man in the room cannot allow the constructed world to suffer what the real world suffered. The construction is doing something very specific. It is keeping everyone alive. Some versions of this theory have been expanded, over the years, by people who found the original and wanted to follow it further. One of the most affecting extensions observes that the show's increasing cruelty, the way Peter becomes less sympathetic and more extreme in the later seasons, the way the warmth of the early family dynamic erodes into something colder and more isolated, could be mapped onto the progressive deterioration of a mind that has been maintaining a very large and very demanding construction for a very long time. The early seasons in this reading are the constructed world at its most functional. The characters feel warmer because the mind building them has more capacity for warmth. The humor is gentler because the mind is not yet exhausted. As the seasons progress and the mind tires, the warmth drains away. The cruelty increases. The connections between characters become more hostile and more superficial because the sustained effort of making them genuinely loving is becoming too much to maintain. The late seasons of Family Guy, in this reading, are not a creative failure. They are a symptom. The man in the room is getting tired, and the cracks are showing in what he has built, and the only response available to him is to keep going anyway, because stopping means returning to the thing he built all of this to escape. There is a detail in the theory that is easy to miss but hard to shake once you have noticed it. The occasional moments when Peter shows Meg genuine tenderness. When he looks at her with something other than contempt, or does something unexpectedly kind, or allows a softness into his voice that the show cannot quite account for through its normal logic. These moments have always seemed slightly out of place, too real, somehow. Squily, for a comedy that has otherwise committed to treating this character as a punchline. The theory reads them as the places where the construction wavers, where the grief gets through the performance, where the man in the room, for just a moment, lets himself remember the girl she actually was. Beautiful, popular, kind, the one who loved her brother enough to spend herself on him. These moments are small and they pass quickly, because the construction reasserts itself, because it has to, but they are there. And in the light of this theory, they are perhaps the most human things in the entire show. People keep finding this theory. It resurfaces every few years, on a new platform, among a new group of people who experience it as something between a revelation and a wound. The reason it keeps landing is not that it is a clever reinterpretation of a cartoon, it is that it is about something true about grief, and the lengths a mind will go to protect itself from unbearable pain, and the ways that love and blame and guilt and tenderness get tangled up in grief until they are indistinguishable from each other. Family Guy, in the light of this theory, is a love story about a man who could not stop loving his family even after everything. That is not the most obvious thing to say about a show best known for extended chicken fight gags and Conway Twitty performances, but it might be the truest. Section 3. Stewie's Eye, the unreliable narrator theory. There is a question about this show that the creators never definitively answered, and that silence is itself a kind of answer. Why can some people understand Stewie and others cannot? The question seems simple. The show treats it as a continuity problem. The writers need Stewie to communicate sometimes for plot purposes, and they need him to be dismissed as a babbling infant at other times for comedy purposes. And so they toggle between the two states based on what the scene requires, without worrying too much about what the rule actually is. This is almost certainly the honest explanation. The show is not a tightly plotted mystery series. It does not feel obligated to maintain consistent internal logic. But the inconsistency, examined carefully, follows a pattern that is interesting enough to take seriously. Brian almost always understands Stewie. The family sometimes does and sometimes does not. Strangers are inconsistent in ways that have no discernible system. And critically, the moments when Stewie is most clearly heard and responded to as a fully articulate being tend to be the moments when the scene is most clearly filtered through Stewie's own emotional experience, moments when what is happening is significant to him, when the interaction matters to him, when his perspective on what is happening is what the scene is really about. This is the foundation of the Stewie perspective theory. The show is not an objective account of the Griffin household's life. It is a subjective account, told from inside the developing consciousness of a one-year-old child. The events of Family Guy are not happening in any straightforward external reality. They are what Stewie makes of the world around him, shaped by his particular perception, his emotional relationships with the people in his life, his developmental stage, and the specific limitations and expansions of a child's imagination operating at full power on the raw material of daily life in a Rhode Island household. This reframes absolutely everything. Start with Brian, because Brian is the most important supporting element in this theory. In any literal sense, Brian is a dog. He does not talk, he does not drive, he does not hold a martini glass or nurse literary ambitions or experience existential dread about the gap between who he is and who he had hoped to become. He is a dog, but very young children engage with the animals in their lives in a particular way. They attribute intention and meaning to animal behavior in a way that adults have largely unlearned. They talk to their pets and interpret the pet's responses as genuine communication. They see emotion in an animal face that an adult would characterize as simple, stimulus response. They build relationships with animals that feel, from inside the child's experience, fully mutual. For Stewie, the family dog is the being in his household who pays him the most consistent, attentive, non-demanding attention. Brian the dog shows up where Stewie is. He is warm. He responds to Stewie's moods. He does not have the competing demands that pull Lois and Peter away. And so, in Stewie's version of the world, Brian is not a pet. He is a person. The most present person in Stewie's daily life, elevated to full humanity by the force of a child's need for connection. The fact that Brian is the one character who almost always understands Stewie becomes, in this reading, not a writing convenience but a structural truth about the theory. Brian the dog responds to Stewie in the ways that dogs respond to the people they are close to, following them, being present with them, showing up when they are distressed, being calm when they are calm. Stewie experiences this as being understood, being heard. And so, in the world Stewie is constructing, Brian hears him. When other characters fail to understand Stewie, those are the moments when the construction breaks down against reality. When, despite all the force of his imagination, Stewie cannot quite make his mother stop and really listen. When his father walks through a scene as though Stewie is not in it. When the adult world operates with its ordinary indifference to the inner life of an infant, and Stewie's version of things cannot fully override this. The inconsistency of who can hear him is the inconsistency of a child trying to make himself real to people who are often too busy or too distracted to fully receive him. This reading of Stewie's relationship with Lois, which defines so much of the show's early seasons, becomes considerably more emotionally nuanced than it initially appears. Lois, as Stewie's nemesis, the target of his obsessive plans, the source of his deepest strategic focus, the one he wants most to overcome, is not a cartoon supervillain in disguise. She is his mother. She is the person who has the most authority over him, who controls the most basic aspects of his experience when he eats, when he sleeps, when he is picked up and set down and moved from one place to another. From the perspective of a one-year-old child, a mother is an enormous force, not malevolent, but powerful beyond anything the child has the capacity to fully negotiate with. The discipline, the schedule, the gentle firmness of a parent who knows better than the baby what the baby needs, all of this, from inside the child's experience, can feel like constraint on a vast scale. Stewie's obsessive scheming against Lois is the inner life of a child who is experiencing for the first time the specific frustration of having desires that the world around him does not organize itself to satisfy. The weapons and machines and elaborate plans are the imagination of a small person who has no real power, filling that powerlessness with fantasies of power. This is not pathological. This is what very young children do. Their inner worlds are enormous and often dark because the outer world offers so little control. A toddler who has been told no for the 100th time in a day is experiencing something that a child with a vivid imagination might translate into a fantasy of being the one who says no, of being the powerful one, the one who directs, the one whose plans other people are subject to rather than the one being carried from room to room according to someone else's schedule. Every weapon Stewie builds in his crib is a crib toy in this reading. Every world domination scheme is a game of make-believe, played at maximum intensity by a child whose inner world is extraordinarily developed relative to his years. The British accent, the sophisticated vocabulary, the villainous bearing, these are the stylistic choices of a child's imagination, the way children cast themselves in dramatic roles when they are playing. Stewie's villain persona is the character he has given himself in his own story. And the story is magnificent because the mind creating it is extraordinary, even if the person creating it is, in the most literal sense, an infant in a high chair. Look at how Stewie characterizes each person in his world, and the emotional logic of his characterizations becomes precise and honest. Peter is enormous, loud, unpredictable, operating on a logic that Stewie cannot fully decode because from 18 inches off the ground, this is exactly what a large adult man is. The exaggerated stupidity of Peter Griffin is not just a joke. It is how a very small person with limited interpretive context experiences an adult male who does not follow obvious rules. Peter does things that confuse Stewie. Peter creates chaos. Peter is affectionate sometimes and absent at others, and the pattern of when and why is opaque to Stewie's limited understanding. The cartoon Peter is Stewie's honest account of this experience. Chris and Meg in Stewie's construction are peripheral figures. They interact with him rarely, and when they do, it is usually with the casual, semi-interested condescension that older siblings bring to babies. He does not have strong feelings about them, which is why they are relatively thinly sketched in the show's early seasons. He simply does not have enough information about them to build them fully. They are the people who exist at the edges of his world present, not particularly attentive to him, moving through their own lives in ways he cannot fully access. Now consider the show's shift in Stewie's characterization over later seasons, the gradual evolution from scheming supervillain towards something softer, more emotionally open, more interested in friendship and belonging than in domination. The theory reads this as Stewie's actual development. As a real child grows, the inner world changes. The pure fantasy of omnipotence that occupies a 1-year-old's imagination does not hold the same appeal at 2, at 3, at 5. Emotional complexity develops. The desire for connection begins to compete with the fantasy of control. Stewie's softening is not a creative choice to make a character more likable. It is the natural progression of a developing mind, playing out in real time over the course of a long-running show. The road trip episodes, in which Brian and Stewie have sustained adventures together, are the most direct representation of Stewie's inner relationship with the dog. Whatever is happening in those episodes in any literal sense, and in any literal sense it involves a baby and a dog somehow navigating complex international scenarios, what is happening inside Stewie's imagination is simpler and more beautiful. A child is playing with his dog. He is building elaborate stories in which they are together, in which the dog is his companion and his partner and his best friend, in which the two of them face the world as a unit and find something there worth having. The adventures are as grand as Stewie's imagination can make them, because this relationship is that important to him. You invest your imagination most fully in the things you love, most completely. The most unsettling dimension of this theory is the one it opens up about what is actually happening in the house, while Stewie builds all of this inside his mind. If the chaos is his subjective experience, if the cruelty is his interpretation, if the violence and the dysfunction are his honest account of what daily life in this household feels like from his position, then the question of what the house is actually like becomes difficult and dark. A child who imagines his father as a reckless destroyer is living with something that prompted that reading. A child who casts his mother as a nemesis to be overcome is experiencing something about his relationship with her that exceeds the normal parameters of caring parental authority. A child whose imaginative life is this saturated with scheming and weapons and the desire for dominion over the world might be a child who does not feel very safe in the world he actually has. The theory does not press this point explicitly. It leaves the door open rather than walking through it. But the door is there, and what is on the other side of it is not comfortable to look at directly. Stewie's inner world is extraordinary, genuinely and magnificently extraordinary, because he is an extraordinary mind. But extraordinary minds do not arise in vacuums, they arise in response to something. And the question of what, exactly, Stewie's inner world arose in response to is one the theory declines to answer, leaving the listener to sit with the question in whatever darkness they have settled into. Section 4. Brian Griffin's Hidden Truth, The Man Inside the Dog. There is a specific, practiced ease to the way Brian Griffin holds a martini glass. Not the general ease of an animated character in a world where the rules of biology are flexible. Something more particular than that. The ease of a person who has done this action thousands of times, for whom the grip and the tilt and the specific angle of the wrist are automatic rather than performed. The ease of muscle memory. The ease of an identity that has been doing this for long enough that the action no longer requires conscious thought to execute correctly. Brian Griffin is the show's most human character. This observation is almost too obvious to make. It is part of the show's basic premise that Brian is a dog who acts human. The joke of his existence is supposed to be the gap between the form he inhabits and the consciousness that inhabits it. But there is a fan theory, substantial and well-evidenced, that suggests the gap is not comedic at all. That it is, in fact, literal. That Brian Griffin is not a dog who has developed human-level consciousness through some mechanism the show declines to explain. He is a human being specifically, a human mind that was placed into a dog's body by external means, and has been living inside that body for the entire run of the show, knowing what he is and unable to fully communicate this knowledge to anyone around him. The primary evidence for this theory comes from a show that shares the same fictional universe, American Dad. In American Dad, Klaus is a recurring character, the Smith family's pet goldfish, who speaks with a German accent and is emphatically not a fish. He is a former Olympic ski jumper whose mind was transferred into a goldfish's body by the CIA, using a technology the show treats as an established and operational part of this world's capabilities. The CIA and American Dad can move consciousness from one biological form into another. This is not subtext or implication. It is explicit plot information, revisited in multiple episodes. The technology exists. The CIA uses it. It has already been used on at least one character who is living with the consequences of it. The theory extends this fact carefully. If the CIA in this universe can transfer a human consciousness into the body of a fish, an animal with a nervous system dramatically less complex than a dog's, then transferring one into a Labrador retriever is well within the established capabilities of the same agency. And if Brian happened to be the subject of exactly this kind of experimental procedure, then everything about him that has always seemed too human to dismiss becomes not a quirk of the show's internal logic, but an accurate reflection of what he actually is. He acts like a human because he is one. The dog is the vessel, the person is elsewhere. Consider the specific evidence the show itself provides when you look at Brian through this lens. He was the only one of his litter who became like this. The show has shown his siblings, other dogs, other puppies, born from the same mother who behave as dogs behave. They do not speak, they do not write, they do not have literary ambitions or political opinions or romantic attachments to human women. They are dogs. Brian is not like them, and the show has never explained why. A CIA mind transfer procedure performed on one puppy in the litter for experimental purposes would create exactly this situation. One dog who is not like the others in any way that the people around him can fully account for. His relationship with alcohol is worth examining in the light of this theory for longer than the show usually invites you to. Brian drinks constantly and heavily. The show frames this as a character flaw, a comedic excess, the affectation of a failed intellectual who uses liquid courage to manage his creative disappointments. But there is another way to understand it. A human consciousness trapped in the wrong body, unable to explain what has happened to it, unable to communicate the full depth of its experience to anyone around it, is a consciousness in a situation of profound and permanent distress. Alcohol is one of the oldest human responses to distress that cannot be named or resolved directly. Brian does not drink the way a dog would drink if dogs could drink. He drinks the way people drink when they are trying to manage something inside themselves that will not sit still without chemical assistance, steadily, habitually, with a quality of necessity underneath the social performance of it. His attraction to Lois, which runs through the show like a low-level current that occasionally spikes to the surface, is in this reading considerably more coherent and considerably more uncomfortable. If Brian has the desires and emotional architecture of a human being, if his capacity for attraction is fully human, arising from a human consciousness rather than from anything properly canine, then his feelings for the woman of the house are the feelings of a person, not a domesticated animal with confused instincts. A person who is living in proximity to someone he is drawn to, in a form that makes it impossible to act on this honestly, trapped in a social category that defines his relationship to this person in ways he cannot override. The tragedy of Brian's longing for Lois is not that a dog has confused feelings. It is that a person is in a situation where having feelings makes everything worse, and not having them would require not being who he is. The writing career that he can never quite launch deserves consideration here. Brian has been working on a novel for years. He talks about it. He references it. He is occasionally asked about his progress on it and deflects the question with the practiced evasion of someone who is genuinely not sure when it will be done. He eventually publishes things, but they are not the serious literary work he imagined for himself. The self-help book that makes him briefly famous is not what he was trying to write. It is what he could produce under the circumstances he is in. And the circumstances are these: a human writer with genuine literary ambitions and the intellectual capacity to potentially fulfill them, is trying to write from inside the body of a dog in a suburban household with limited access to the resources, quiet, and focused time that serious writing requires. His literary career is not a joke about a pretentious dog. It is a portrait of thwarted potential. A person who might have been a writer might have made something real from the intelligence and sensitivity they possess, operating in a context that makes this essentially impossible. The Brian and Stewie episode, the Season 8 episode in which the two of them are locked in a bank vault overnight and have the most raw, sustained, honest conversation that either character has on the show, is the most direct evidence the show provides that Brian is carrying something too large to carry alone. He tells Stewie about the gun in the safety deposit box. He tells Stewie that there are days when he is not sure why he is here or what he is doing with what he has. He does not say, "I do not understand my own existence," or "I feel trapped inside the wrong life," or "I know what I am and cannot become it." But the emotional territory of what he describes is precisely this. He is describing the specific, grinding despair of a consciousness that has been unable to fully inhabit itself for an indeterminate amount of time. And Stewie's response, which is tender and genuine and barely contained, is the response of someone who loves the person in front of him and cannot bear the thought of losing them. That episode has no cutaway gags, no random jokes, no random moments of absurdist comedy to soften what is being said. It trusts the characters to carry the weight of what they are talking about, and they do. This is, the theory notes, because the writers were, consciously or not, accessing something true about these characters that the show's normal mode does not usually allow them to reach. Brian, given a night with no one watching except the one person who has always seen him most clearly, is not performing. He is being, and what he is, in that vault, is someone who has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time. The question the theory leaves open, the one that lingers after you have followed its logic as far as it goes, is the question of the person who became Brian. Was it voluntary? Is there someone, somewhere in this universe's history, who agreed to be put into a dog? Or did something happen to a person? Did a life get interrupted? Did a procedure go wrong? Did someone wake up with paws instead of hands and no capacity to explain to the people standing in front of them what they needed them to understand? And if that person remembers what they were before, if that memory is not erased by the procedure, if it persists and recedes, and sometimes surfaces in the middle of the night in whatever way memories surface in a dog's brain, then what is Brian's inner life like in the moments the show does not show us? In the quiet of the house after everyone is asleep, in whatever privacy a dog's body allows, in the long hours between episodes, when there is no story to occupy the consciousness and nothing to do but be aware of itself? The theory does not go there explicitly, but the space it makes for that question is one of the most affecting things about it, because it transforms a cartoon dog into a person, into someone who needed something to go differently. And the show, for all that it regularly forgets this, for all that it sometimes treats Brian as a punchline for his pretensions or his hypocrisy, is also the show that gave us that vault scene. The show that let him say, to the one person who would actually hear it, "I am not sure why I am here." And the one person who heard it said, "I know why you are here. You are here because of me." And that was enough. For that episode, in that vault, It was enough. Section 5. What Meg is for the scapegoat, the sacrifice, and the weight she carries. There is an episode in Season 10 called Seahorse Seashell Party. If you have watched this episode, you already know why it belongs in a video about disturbing theories. If you have not, the setup is this. A hurricane is keeping the Griffin family trapped inside their house. The confinement builds pressure in the usual way that confinement does, and Meg, who has been absorbing the family's collective cruelty for however many seasons at this point, finally stops absorbing it. She turns to her family and starts talking. Not screaming, not breaking down, talking. With the particular steadiness of someone who has been waiting for years to say true things and has finally decided that the cost of saying them is less than the cost of not saying them. She tells Peter what kind of father he has been. She tells Lois what kind of mother she has allowed herself to become. She is not wrong about any of it. The specifics she names are things the show has actually depicted, and she names them with the precision of someone who has been keeping careful track for a very long time because she was the only person in the room doing so. It is one of the most quietly powerful moments in the show's long history. An animated teenager in a bad hat speaking truth that the show has been letting accumulate for years, finally given the scene where it can be spoken. And for a moment, it works. The family is destabilized. The dynamic that has held them in position, each of them playing their role, Meg's role being the one who absorbs, is disrupted by the simple act of her stepping out of it. Without Meg as the designated target, the Griffins turn on each other. The resentments they have been depositing into Meg instead of processing directly begin to surface. The family, stripped of its scapegoat, starts to fall apart. Then the episode ends. Meg goes to Brian. She tells him she understands what her role in the family is. She accepts it. She says she can see now that her suffering is load-bearing, that without it, the family cannot hold together. She takes back everything she said. She returns to her position, and the family, with Meg back in her place, returns to equilibrium. This ending is the most disturbing thing the show has ever done. Not the most violent, not the most offensive, not the most extreme, the most disturbing. Because it tells you, clearly and without apparent irony, that the correct response to years of being treated as a punching bag by your family is to accept that your suffering is necessary and go back to providing it. It takes the narrative of a girl standing up for herself and finding her voice, and turns it into the narrative of a girl realizing that standing up for herself is a luxury she cannot afford, because too many other people depend on her, not doing it. The fan theory that has built up around Meg's function in the family reaches far beyond this episode, though the episode is its most concentrated expression. The theory draws on the concept of the scapegoat not as a casual insult but as a formal term from family systems therapy, where it describes a specific and well-documented dynamic. In a dysfunctional family system, the scapegoat is the designated member onto whom the system's collective dysfunction is projected. The scapegoat absorbs. Every other member of the family can experience themselves as relatively functional because there is one person whose dysfunction is so visible, so available, so easily blamed, that it draws the focus of everything that would otherwise have to be distributed across the whole system. The family stays together around its shared treatment of the scapegoat, united by what it does to her, if not by any of the things it is supposed to be united by. Scapegoating, in family systems theory, is not usually conscious or intentional. It emerges from structural dynamics rather than deliberate cruelty. The family does not decide to make Meg the scapegoat. The function emerges because Meg is available for it, because she does not resist it effectively, because the system discovers that having her there in this role is easier than doing the harder work of processing its actual dysfunction. And once the function is established, the system will defend it. Seahorse Seashell Party is the show depicting, with alarming accuracy, what happens when a family system's scapegoating function is threatened. The system pushes back. It turns on the person who disrupted the dynamic. It exerts pressure until the disruption is resolved and the scapegoat returns to position. The theory extends beyond the family system's framework into territory that is stranger and older. Several versions of it invoke the mythological tradition of the scapegoat, which predates psychology by several thousand years. In the most ancient versions of this tradition, the scapegoat was a literal animal, a goat, typically onto which the community's collective sins and corruption were ritually transferred. The goat was then driven into the wilderness, carrying with it everything the community needed to be rid of. The community was purified by the act of transfer. It was made clean again. The goat was made to carry everything that had accumulated and then expelled so that the accumulation could be survived. Meg's situation maps onto this tradition with uncomfortable precision. She is not just the target of her family's cruelty. She is, in the most formal sense, the tradition provides, the vessel into which the community's dysfunction is poured so that the community can continue. The town of their particular Rhode Island is not incidentally cruel to her, it is structurally so. Strangers recoil from her. Teachers overlook her. Bullies target her not because they know her, but because the social system of her high school has organized itself around the availability of a target, and she is the one the system has selected. She is the scapegoat of a community, not just a family. And the community, like the family, is purified by what it does to her. The darkest version of this theory suggests that Meg knows this, that she is not simply a victim of a dynamic she cannot see or understand, that her acceptance of her role in Seahorse Seashell Party is not passive resignation but active, knowing sacrifice, that she sees the family clearly enough to understand that her willingness to keep absorbing is the only thing standing between its current dysfunctional but functional state and its complete dissolution. She does not want to be the scapegoat, but she understands, with a clarity none of the other family members possess, that if she stops being it, what comes next is worse for everyone she loves. This makes Meg, in the darkest reading of the theory, the most heroic person in the show. Not heroic in a way the show ever rewards or acknowledges. Heroic in the quiet, unseen, daily way that certain kinds of heroism operate by continuing, by enduring, by being present in a role that everyone else in the system benefits from and no one in the system thanks. She is the one who keeps the house standing. She is just never permitted to be in a house that is standing for her benefit. The theory also carries an uncomfortable implication about the show's own relationship to this dynamic. By portraying Meg's return to the scapegoat position as the resolution of the episode by letting her decision to go back be the thing that restores equilibrium, the show participates in the logic it is depicting. It is not satirizing the scapegoating of Meg. It is, in the structure of that episode, endorsing it. The narrative form validates what the family does to her by making her return to it. The emotional release valve. The moment that restores the satisfying sense of order. The show, in Seahorse Seashell Party, is doing to the viewer what the family does to Meg. It is asking you to feel relief at her continued suffering, because her continued suffering is what makes the system work. Whether this was intentional on the writer's part is a question without a clear answer. What is clear is that the episode, read this carefully, reveals something about the show's relationship to this particular character that does not reflect especially well on the people who made it. They understood the dynamic well enough to depict it accurately. They chose not to disrupt it. The one moment the show comes closest to disrupting it is the Lisa Simpson encounter. Lisa, who comes from outside the Griffin family system, who has no stake in Meg's continued availability as a scapegoat, who is simply someone who recognizes intelligence and sensitivity in another person, because those are things Lisa herself possesses and values. Lisa sees Meg, really sees her. The talent for the saxophone, the capacity for feeling, the person who exists behind the role. And in being seen by Lisa, Meg is briefly, clearly, fully herself. Not the scapegoat, just a person. The episode ends. Lisa goes back to Springfield. Meg goes back to Spooner Street. The window closes. But for one episode, the show showed you what it has always known about Meg and has almost never let surface. She is the most human character in it. The one whose desires to be loved, to be seen, to belong somewhere, to have her presence mean something to the people around her, are the most completely ordinary and recognizable human desires anyone in the show expresses. And the system around her has been organized, with a consistency that resembles intention, around ensuring that those desires are never satisfied. Section 6. The house that shouldn't be 31 Spooner Street and its impossible interior. Let us talk about the architecture. The Griffin House at 31 Spooner Street is one of the most recognizable structures in animated television. Yellow clapboard siding. A teal roof that should look wrong but has become so familiar it looks right. A red front door. A living room that you know as well as your own, with the green couch and the television and the specific feeling of a space that has held thousands of hours of stories without changing in any fundamental way. And yet, the house does not behave like a house should. This is something attentive viewers have documented for years, mapping the inconsistencies with the patient attention of people who care about these things more than the show ever intended them to. Rooms appear and disappear based on plot necessity. The spatial relationship between the kitchen and the living room shifts. Staircases begin in different positions from episode to episode. The basement manifests when a scene requires it and is absent when it does not. The backyard fluctuates in size and layout in ways that cannot be accounted for by simple measurement. The upstairs hallway has a different number of doors depending on who is walking down it. The obvious explanation is that the show does not prioritize architectural consistency, because consistency in any domain has never been its particular strength, and whoever is drawing any given scene is drawing from memory and convenience rather than from a set of established reference plans. This is probably true. The show was not making a careful spatial argument with its floor plan. But the fan theory that has grown up around the house's impossible geography is not interested in what the creators intended. It is interested in what the inconsistency means when you take it seriously as a fact about the world of the show rather than as an error in its production. And what it means in this reading is that the house does not have a fixed reality. It shifts because the space it represents is not a physical space at all. It is a mental one. A space built by whatever consciousness is constructing the show's world, whether that is Peter's fractured grief, Stewie's developing perception, some external simulation, or something else, and rebuilt each episode from whatever the story currently requires. In a real physical space, the kitchen is always in the same place. The stairs always begin at the same end of the hallway. The bedroom doors are consistent in number. Physical space is governed by the persistence of matter. Things remain where they are placed because the universe does not reorganize itself based on narrative convenience. A mental space, a simulated space, a constructed space is under no such obligation. It produces whatever is needed for the experience the mind is building. The kitchen is sometimes here and sometimes there because the mind building the house is not maintaining a blueprint. It is generating space as it goes, from whatever materials and memory and need are currently available. The chemical contamination theory connects to this architectural instability in an interesting way. In Season 5, the show establishes that Lake Quahog, the body of water at the center of the town's geography, is heavily and badly polluted. The contaminants are named, and the degree of contamination is presented as severe enough to be alarming if anyone in the show were paying the appropriate level of attention to public health concerns. Nobody is. The polluted lake is treated as a background fact and then mostly ignored. The theory treats it as central. Long-term exposure to the neurotoxic compounds found in industrial water contamination is associated, in documented real-world cases, with disruptions to cognitive function, memory, spatial reasoning, and impulse control. If the residents of the town who presumably drink the water, whose children play near the lake, whose daily lives bring them into sustained proximity to the contaminated source, have been exposed to these compounds for years, then the progressive strangeness of their behavior is not a creative choice by the writing room. It is an in-universe consequence of living in a poisoned place. Peter becomes crueler as the seasons progress. His impulse control deteriorates. His ability to accurately predict the consequences of his actions declines. His memory of events that should be significant seems to reset episode to episode in ways that go beyond cartoon convention. Lois becomes colder, more detached, less capable of the warmth she showed in the early seasons. Chris seems to lose further cognitive function over time rather than gaining any. These are all consistent with the progressive effects of long-term, low-dose neurological contamination. Stewie, meanwhile, gets gentler. His aggression decreases. His emotional capacity increases. He becomes more interested in connection and less interested in domination. The theory offers an interesting explanation for this. Some neurological toxins do not have uniform effects across all individuals. In some people, the same compounds that increase aggression and decrease empathy in adults can paradoxically suppress aggression and increase emotional sensitivity in very young children, whose developing nervous systems interact with these compounds differently. Stewie, the youngest and most neurologically plastic person in the household, may be experiencing the effects of the contamination in the opposite direction from the adults around him. The cutaway gags in this reading are the most visually precise representation of what contaminated cognition actually looks like from the inside. A thought begins normally. A character is in the middle of a sentence, a situation, a moment of ordinary life. And then the mind cuts away to something else entirely. Something retrieved from an inappropriate context. Something that arrived without warning. Something that bears no apparent logical relationship to what was happening a moment ago. This is a documented feature of certain forms of neurological disruption. the involuntary intrusion of irrelevant material into the ongoing stream of thought. The cutaway gag is not a stylistic device invented by the show. It is, in this theory, a symptom, an accurate visualization of what it is like to think in a contaminated way. The town's zip code 00093, revealed in a Season 7 episode, is not a real zip code. No location in the United States has this designation. The town is placed in Newport County, Rhode Island, but does not correspond to any actual city or town in that county in any geographically consistent way. The show is set in a Rhode Island that is recognizable as Rhode Island Providence is nearby, the Ocean State aesthetic is present, the specific New England cultural texture is identifiable, but that is slightly, persistently off. A version of a real place that exists in a different register from the real place, close enough to feel familiar, wrong enough that it never quite resolves into something you can pin to a map. This geographic uncanniness is the architectural instability extended to the scale of the town. The same principle applies. The place exists as a mental or constructed space rather than a physical one, and so it shares the characteristics of such spaces recognizable, internally organized around necessity rather than physical law, responsive to what the story needs it to be rather than to the persistence of matter in space. The neighbors on Spooner Street are, in certain readings of the house theory, more than just peripheral characters. They are aspects of the central consciousness externalized into separate households. Joe Swanson, who lives next door, is a police officer whose disability means he cannot act on his capacity for heroism with the freedom he once had. He represents, in this symbolic geography, the part of the central consciousness that knows what is right and what should be done, but is constrained in its ability to act on this knowledge. Glenn Quagmire, who lives on the other side, represents the part that acts purely on impulse without regard for the consequences to others. And Cleveland, who used to live on the street before being given his own narrative in another show, represents the part of the consciousness that eventually achieved some distance that managed, at least temporarily, to separate itself from the central situation and build something in a different place. The red door of 31 Spooner Street is, in this geography, the entrance to the self. The particular redness of it, warmer than warning, more deliberate than decoration, is the marker that says, this is the one, this is where it starts. Whatever is being built, whatever is being maintained, whatever impossible domestic arrangement is somehow continuing to function inside these walls, it starts here, at this door, in this house, that is the wrong size and the wrong shape, and located on a street that does not exist in any physical sense, but is somehow exactly where it needs to be. Section 7. The Hidden Monster: What Lois is Actually Doing. Most viewers who watch Family Guy from the beginning experience Lois Griffin as the most reasonable person in the house. This is exactly what she wants. This is, the theory argues, the most successful and sustained manipulation the show has ever depicted without labeling it as such. Lois is smart. This is not in question. The show demonstrates her intelligence consistently across its run. In episodes where she takes on roles that require genuine competence as a news anchor, as a pilot, as a politician, as a woman navigating complex social situations with a deftness that none of the people around her can match, her intelligence is one of the most consistent facts the show establishes about her, more consistent than almost any other character trait, and yet she has chosen deliberately, from among a range of available options, with the full force of her evident intelligence behind the decision to be a housewife in a modest house married to a man who is, by every observable measure, substantially her inferior in cognitive function. Peter Griffin is not a peer of Lois Pewterschmidt. He never was. The theory spends considerable time asking why an intelligent woman who grew up wealthy, who had educational and social resources available to her that most people never encounter, who could plausibly have chosen any number of paths through life, chose this one. The answer the theory proposes is not romantic, it is strategic. A man with no independent resources, no social standing, no alternative support structure, and no particular confidence in his own capacities is a man who is entirely dependent on the relationship he is in. He has nowhere else to go. He has no position from which to negotiate the dynamics of the household. He will absorb whatever structure is established around him because the alternative to absorption is isolation, and isolation is something Peter's constitution is not equipped for. In choosing Peter, Lois chose a partner who would never leave and who would never successfully resist whatever domestic architecture she built around him. This is not the romance of a wealthy girl who fell for a common man's genuine heart. It is the calculation of a person who understood, at whatever level calculations like this are usually made, that being the most competent person in a domestic partnership gives you the most power in it, and that having the most power in a domestic partnership, if you are managing it correctly, looks from the outside exactly like being the most patient and reasonable person in it. Lois does not look like she runs the household. She looks like she maintains it. These are different things. Running something is visible. Maintaining it is invisible. The person who runs it gets the credit. The person who maintains it gets the gratitude. And the person who maintains it, who does the invisible management that keeps the system functioning, is the one who actually determines how the system works. Consider her relationship with Meg through this lens. The theory observes that Lois rarely, if ever, intervenes when Peter's cruelty toward their daughter reaches levels that, in a real family, would constitute emotional abuse requiring parental response. She sometimes makes a mild, quickly abandoned objection. She sometimes says something generically supportive to Meg after the fact, but she does not stop it. She does not draw a line. She does not tell Peter that this particular behavior is not something she will tolerate in her household. And the theory asks why not? Because it is not as though Lois lacks the capacity to manage Peter's behavior when she wants to. She manages it all the time, in dozens of other contexts, with a practiced efficiency that demonstrates clearly that she knows how to redirect him when she chooses to. She does not choose to, with Meg, because the scapegoating of Meg serves Lois. As long as Peter's cruelty has a designated object, as long as there is a member of the family onto whom dysfunction can be directed, it is not being directed at Lois. She is the good parent, by contrast, the reasonable one, the one who is slightly exasperated by what Peter does to Meg, but cannot quite prevent it. This positioning gives Lois moral credit without requiring moral risk. She disapproves of the treatment without stopping it, which is perhaps the most comfortable position available, the person who expresses concern from a safe distance. Her past is stranger and darker than the show usually lingers on. She was a kleptomaniac at one point. She has been shown to be capable of behavior that the show treats as aberrant for her, but that the theory reads as simply the surface breaking through moments when the person underneath the performance of patient housewife is briefly visible. She has been sexually reckless in her history in ways the show has referenced without fully exploring. She has acted with deliberate cruelty towards specific individuals when she believed the social consequences would be manageable. In these moments, the theory argues, the real Lois is appearing, not the warm, long-suffering wife. The person who has been managing her presentation very carefully for years and occasionally lets it slip. Her father Carter is perhaps the most important figure for understanding her. Carter Pewterschmidt is controlling, manipulative, and utterly comfortable using his money and position to direct the people around him toward the outcomes he prefers. He does not make requests. He makes conditions. He holds his resources over his family as a reminder that everyone who is comfortable in his proximity is comfortable because he permits it. Lois grew up in this environment. She learned its lessons from the inside. She saw for years how effectively this approach can be applied, and she emerged from it with a granular understanding of how power operates in intimate relationships. She did not become her father, she went in a different direction, married down rather than up, built a small world rather than a large one. But the principles she absorbed in her father's house did not disappear. They traveled with her to Spooner Street, and they have been operating there, quietly and effectively, ever since. Her relationship with Brian is one of the theory's most interesting details. Brian is explicitly in love with Lois. This has been a fact about the show's emotional landscape since early in its run, and Lois is aware of it. The show makes clear that she knows and has always known. What she does with this knowledge is what reveals the theory's logic most precisely. She neither fully accepts his feelings nor fully dismisses them. She maintains the ambiguity. She holds Brian in a state of sustained uncertainty about his standing, about whether the feelings are reciprocated in some way, about what the nature of their relationship actually is. In family systems terms, this is triangulation, the use of a third-party relationship to manage tension in the primary partnership without resolving it. In more ordinary terms, it is the behavior of someone who understands that Brian's emotional investment in her is an asset. It keeps him present. It keeps him engaged. It keeps him available in a way that serves her, whether she ever acts on it or not. None of this makes Lois a villain in any simple sense. She is not plotting against her family. She is managing it. And the distinction, from inside her own experience, may be difficult to see. The patterns she has developed over years of managing an enormous personality in a small house may feel to her like the natural expression of who she is, rather than the deliberate exercise of structural power that they appear to be from outside. This is, the theory notes, how successful systems of control almost always feel from the inside, not like control, but like sense, like the reasonable, obvious, necessary way to keep things working. The most revealing moment in Lois's arc is the episode where she briefly becomes the mayor of their town. She is immediately good at it. Not surprisingly good. Naturally, automatically, effortlessly good at it. The skills that have been applied, in compressed form, to the management of one small household expand without friction to the management of a municipal government. She is comfortable with authority. She is comfortable making decisions that affect other people's lives without significant consultation. She is comfortable in positions of structural power. This is not a new side of her character. It is the character fully expressed in a context appropriate to its actual scale. The housewife role was never the right size for her. It was just the most controllable. And that distinction between the right size and the most controllable is perhaps the most honest summary of what the theory proposes about who Lois Griffin actually is. Section 8. Glenn Quagmire and what he cannot explain about himself. Glenn Quagmire is past 60 years old. The show makes this explicit. Various episodes have established his age in ways that cannot be dismissed as rounding errors or animation conventions. He is a man in his 60s who appears to be in his early 30s and shows no indication that this will ever change. He does not age, he does not deteriorate. He absorbs the consequences of a lifestyle that should have significant cumulative physical effects, the scale and variety of his sexual activity, the diseases he has contracted and by his own account carries, the physical risks his behavior regularly exposes him to without accumulating any visible damage. He is the same today as he was at the beginning. He will be the same, the show implies, long after everyone around him has aged into something else. The fan theory that takes this impossibility seriously is the incubus theory. In the classical demonological tradition, one that predates Christianity and exists in some form across multiple cultural traditions, an incubus is a supernatural entity whose primary mode of existence involves intimate interaction with humans. Different traditions characterize the nature and purpose of this entity differently. Some emphasize predation. The entity feeds on the energy generated by intimate encounters in a way that depletes the human partner over time. Others emphasize something more complex and less straightforwardly hostile. The entity exists in a gray zone between human and non-human, genuinely drawn to human contact but not capable of human vulnerability, able to participate in human intimacy without being fully subject to its consequences. What all accounts of this entity share is a specific cluster of characteristics. It maintains a youthful appearance indefinitely. It is irresistible in ways that cannot be fully accounted for by physical attractiveness alone. Its appeal operates below the level of conscious preference, drawing people in despite their better judgment and sometimes against their explicit desires. It does not suffer from the diseases it encounters or the physical damage it sustains. And it is, at its core, a creature that has been doing what it does for a very long time, that has accumulated a depth of experience with human beings that gives it a quality of patient observation beneath whatever personality it currently presents. Quagmire fits this profile in ways that are precise enough to be worth taking seriously. He is irresistible to women, in ways the show consistently depicts but never quite accounts for. Characters who have been warned about him by other characters still find themselves drawn in. Women who encounter him once return for more despite having full information about his history. His success with partners is so consistent and so varied that the social dynamics of his neighborhood cannot explain it. No human being, regardless of charisma, achieves what Quagmire achieves with the consistency and variety he achieves it. Something additional is operating. The theory names it. His relationship with sexually transmitted diseases is one of the most telling details. The show has made explicit that he carries multiple diseases. He has weaponized this in at least one episode, using the diseases as a deliberate instrument against someone he wished to harm. He can transmit them. He is not harmed by them. He processes whatever biological material he encounters without the biological consequences that human systems would experience. This is not how human immunity works. Even extraordinary human immunity does not allow its possessor to carry and transmit diseases without personal effect. For a non-biological or semi-biological entity operating through a human-appearing form, this is more explicable. The diseases exist in him the way parasites exist in a host that evolved alongside them, functional but not ultimately significant. The show has shown in one crossover moment that is usually treated as pure absurdist comedy, Quagmire killing Homer Simpson, Marge Simpson, and implicitly their children when they discover him in a situation he cannot afford to have discovered. The scene is rapid and brutal and then over, treated as a gag rather than as a revelation. The theory treats it as a revelation. An entity that has been at this for as long as Quagmire apparently has does not kill casually or frequently. Frequent violence would draw the attention of institutions it cannot afford to engage with directly. But it kills when necessary, when exposure threatens, when the cover that allows it to continue operating in the way it operates is genuinely at risk. The Homer incident is not a joke, it is maintenance. His relationship with the Griffins, particularly with Peter, has the quality of something that predates the show's own timeline. Quagmire was there before the show started and shows no signs of having arrived from anywhere. He simply exists, at 29 Spooner Street, a given feature of the neighborhood in the same way that the street itself is a given feature. He has no backstory that satisfies the normal narrative requirements of backstory, no clear account of where he came from, who he was before this street, what his life looked like before the Griffins were his neighbors. The theory offers an explanation. There was no before. He moves through human environments the way he moves through human lifetimes. Present, attentive, sustainable, indefinitely. This neighborhood is the current one. There have been others. His antagonism toward Brian, specifically, deserves attention. Quagmire hates Brian in a way that goes beyond the ordinary human capacity for antipathy. He hates him specifically and precisely. The speech he delivers about why he hates Brian in the episode Jerome is the New Black is one of the most sustained and accurate character assessments the show has ever produced. It is also, the theory notes, the kind of assessment that comes from very careful, very sustained observation. Quagmire has been watching Brian. He has been watching everyone. He knows, with a precision that ordinary human social observation would not produce, exactly what Brian is. Not in the CIA experiment sense the Brian theory establishes. In the social and moral sense, who Brian is, what he has done, how the gap between his self-image and his behavior operates, and why that gap is worth calling out. The entity is old. It has watched people for a long time. It knows how human beings work in the specific, unsentimental way that watching them for centuries would produce. It can identify the difference between who a person is performing themselves to be and who they actually are. It sees through Brian's pretensions because seeing through pretensions is something it has had a great deal of time to become very good at. The chin, for what it is worth, is something. Quagmire's jaw is drawn with an exaggeration that exceeds the show's general approach to caricature. It projects forward in a way that looks architectural rather than biological, as though the face is straining to become something more than a face. In various traditions, non-human entities that take human form have tells small ways in which the form is not quite right, in which something shows through the surface that should not be visible. The artistic choice that produced Quagmire's jaw may have been purely comedic in its intention, but the result is a face that looks, once you have been given the lens of the theory, slightly wrong, in a way that the other faces on the show do not. He will outlast the show. He will outlast the neighborhood. He will be here, looking exactly as he looks now, wearing some different name and some different decade, when the houses on Spooner Street have been replaced by something else and the people who used to live there are distant memories. This is not menacing, exactly, in the theory's conception of him. He is not a predator in any malicious sense. He is simply what he is: old, enduring, organized around the perpetual availability of human connection in the specific way that a being which feeds on human connection would naturally be organized. The suburb is efficient for his purposes. He has found a good place. He will stay. Giggity. Section 9. The Closed Universe Purgatory, Simulation, and What the Town Actually Is. What kind of place is this? Not in the sense of its fictional geography, which we have established is inconsistent in ways that accumulate into something more interesting than production carelessness. In the deeper sense, what is the ontological status of the town and its inhabitants? What are the rules that govern the reality they are living in? What is the logic that makes this world work the way it works? And why does that logic so persistently diverge from the logic of physical reality? Because the world of Family Guy operates by rules that are not the rules of ordinary existence, and this has been true since the first episode. Characters die and come back. Time is accessible, navigable, revisable. Reality branches into parallel versions that occasionally bleed through. The consequences of catastrophic events evaporate between scenes. Death, when it does manage to land, is rarely permanent. These are not the rules of the world we live in, but they might be precisely the rules of a specific kind of constructed or post-mortem space. The purgatory theory proposes that the town and every person in it are not living in any ordinary sense. They have died. They are somewhere between wherever they were and wherever they are going, working through the terms of their own particular incompleteness in a space designed to surface exactly the failures and limitations and unlearned lessons that need surfacing before anything further can happen. This theory has been elaborated extensively across several fan communities, most notably on the TV Tropes Wiki, where it appears in a form so detailed and internally consistent that it reads less like a fan invention and more like a reasonable secondary interpretation of the text. The version we will explore here draws on the most widely agreed upon elements. In the purgatory version of this world, each character's situation is their sentence not as punishment in any vindictive sense, but as the precise arrangement most likely to produce the growth they failed to produce in life. The situation is tailored. It surfaces the exact things that need surfacing, and it does not end until the lesson is absorbed, which is why some characters change and some do not, and why the ones who do not change are still here after more than 20 seasons. Peter was, in life, a man who lived entirely for his own appetites. He ate, drank, acted on impulse, took what he wanted, and arranged the world around his own momentary satisfaction without substantial consideration of what this cost anyone else. His purgatory is a life in which he continues to do exactly this, but in a context where the consequences of this behavior are continuously surfaced. He causes harm, episode after episode, and the harm is visible. He loses things. He damages relationships. He creates situations that should, in any normal moral accounting, produce genuine guilt and genuine change. The lesson is, consider others. Think before you act. The capacity for empathy that you denied in life is here being asked of you in every episode. He has not learned it, which is why the show has been running this long. Lois was a person of privilege and intelligence who used both to manage and control the people around her while maintaining a presentation of warmth and reasonableness that masked the management. Her purgatory is a life in which her privilege is substantially reduced, her intelligence is underutilized, and her control over her environment is continuously threatened by the unpredictability of Peter. She is asked to genuinely care for someone she cannot fully control, to extend warmth that is not instrumentalized, to be a good mother, a good wife, in a context where being good at these things requires the genuine vulnerability she was never willing to show in life. She is better at this than Peter is at his equivalent lesson, which is why Lois is slightly more sympathetic in the show's reading. But she has not fully learned it either. Brian and Stewie are described, in the most fully developed version of the theory, as something other than souls being processed. They are the purgatory's overseers beings assigned to the space to ensure that the characters in it keep engaging with their lessons, that no one escapes prematurely, that the conditions remain those in which growth is possible. This would explain Brian's and Stewie's access to capacities that the human characters do not have. Brian's human-level consciousness in a non-human body, which gives him perspective the human characters cannot access, and Stewie's time machine and extra-dimensional technology, which are the operational tools of someone whose job involves monitoring a space that exists outside ordinary temporal constraints. The problem, in this reading, is that Stewie has gotten too close to the subjects he is supposed to be merely observing. He has formed an attachment to Brian, specifically, but also more broadly to the family he was assigned to watch. This is, in various mythological traditions, exactly what happens when beings of his kind spend too much time among humans. They develop preferences, form bonds, stop being able to maintain the clean observational distance their function requires. The evolution of Stewie from cold, scheming villain to warm, emotionally engaged friend is not a character arc the show created for audience appeal. It is the record of an overseer being changed by what he was supposed to simply watch. The episode where Stewie uses a stolen time travel device to go back and prevent Brian's death, Christmas Guy, Season 12, is the most complete expression of what the attachment has produced. An overseer who has been altered by his proximity to the subjects breaks the fundamental rule of his function. He intervenes. He saves someone he loves. He uses the tools of the job for purposes the job was never designed to allow. This is, across all the traditions that deal with this kind of figure, the most significant thing such a being can do. And Stewie does it without apparent hesitation, which tells you everything about how far from his original function he has traveled. The simulation theory is the secular parallel to the purgatory theory, reaching for different metaphysical machinery to describe the same structural observation. The world of Family Guy is a simulation. It is a constructed reality, maintained by some external intelligence for some purpose, within which the characters are moving through a designed experience rather than a freely navigated life. One specific version of this theory is grounded in a crossover detail from American Dad. In that show, a technology exists called vacation goo tanks that can place a person in a fully immersive, completely convincing simulation of their own life, indistinguishable from the real thing, maintained indefinitely without the person's awareness. The CIA uses this technology in American Dad for various purposes, all of which involve keeping someone in a controlled environment while remaining unaware of the control. The theory proposes that when Stan Smith shoots Peter Griffin in the cold opening of an American Dad episode, the encounter that follows is not resolved the way it appears to be. Peter is extracted and placed in a vacation goo tank. The CIA, for reasons the theory does not fully specify, has decided to keep him there to observe how his psychology operates under sustained simulated conditions, or to contain him safely while his real body is studied, or simply because Peter Griffin in a tank is a more manageable Peter Griffin than Peter Griffin in the world. The Family Guy that viewers have been watching for 20-plus seasons is the simulation. The vacation goo is producing a perfect replica of Peter's life, drawn from his own memories and desires, populated with convincing versions of everyone he knows and loves, organized around the kind of random, consequence-free chaos that keeps a person too stimulated to notice they are in a box. The cutaway gags are the CIA's distraction mechanism in this reading. The simulation keeps Peter from noticing that he is in a simulation by never letting his attention settle on any one thing long enough to detect the seams. Every time a thought starts to develop in a direction that might lead toward awareness, toward noticing that nothing here has permanent consequences, that the same situations keep arising, that people die and come back, that reality does not hold still the way reality is supposed to hold still, a cutaway gag appears. Something random and engaging and completely disconnected from whatever was being thought about a moment ago sweeps the thought away and begins something new. The simulation is not realistic. It is distracting. And the distraction has been working for over 2 decades. The moments when the show is most self-aware, when characters address the camera, acknowledge their own existence as television characters, make jokes about the quality of their own writing, break the fourth wall in ways that go beyond comic convention into something stranger and more pointed. These are, in this reading, the simulation glitching. Peter's consciousness, some deep and patient part of it, keeps pressing against the walls, keeps trying to find the edge. The simulation responds with more distraction, more chaos, more random brilliance and nonsense. But the pressing continues. The awareness is there, underneath everything. It just cannot quite break through. Section 10. The Dead One's a careful tour through the afterlife of Spooner Street. Death in the world of Family Guy is not what it appears to be. This has been true since the very first season, when the show introduced its anthropomorphic death, a robed, voiced entity who participates in social situations, has opinions, can be bargained with, and who is, in the show's logic, just another character in a world where the final word has not been spoken about anything. The show's death is not a threat. He is a complication, a figure to be outmaneuvered, apologized to, invited to dinner while someone else is temporarily dying in his place. If a show's depiction of death tells you something about how the show conceives of existence, then Family Guy's death tells you that this world's relationship with finality is more flexible than the real world allows. Characters die and come back. Brian was hit by a car, mourned at length, replaced by another dog, and returned 2 episodes later through a time travel correction that the show framed as heartwarming and the audience largely experienced as relief. This is the most dramatic example, but not the only one. Death in this world is repeatedly depicted as reversible, negotiable, or simply incorrect, as something that the narrative has the authority to retract. The theory we are examining takes this as a structural clue rather than a storytelling convenience. If death in this world is that flexible, if it is that often undone, that often negotiated, that consistently subject to revision, then the most parsimonious explanation is that the characters have already passed through the state that death usually represents. They are on the other side of it. Death cannot fully touch them because death has already happened. What they are living in is the life that comes after. The hell theory is the starkest version of this proposition. It proposes that each character is in the specific configuration most calibrated to their torment, not dramatic theatrical torment, but the slow, sustained, specific torment of being permanently yourself in a permanent version of the circumstances your worst qualities create. Stewie, an intelligence of extraordinary scope, a consciousness that could theoretically do anything with the right tools and circumstances, is locked in the body of a 1-year-old infant. He cannot drive, he cannot vote, he cannot access the adult world's resources, he cannot execute any plan without assistance. Every capacity he possesses is frustrated by the form he possesses it in. The gap between what he is and what his body allows him to be is permanent and infinite. This is the hell of a person who was, in life, defined by the conviction that they were too large for the container the world provided them. The purgatory has arranged a container that is even more inadequate than the one they had before. The lesson that the container is not the problem, that the problem is the conviction, has not yet been learned. Lois, a person of intelligence and social advantage, who organized her entire life around maintaining control of her environment and the people in it, is in a life where her control is continuously undermined by the person she chose to give it to. She chose Peter, and Peter is the least controllable possible partner. He destroys what she builds. He undermines what she establishes. He requires constant renegotiation of everything she thought was settled. This is the hell of a controller, the eternal presence of the one variable that cannot be fully managed. She cannot leave. She cannot fully reach him. She can only keep trying, which is the very thing that defines her, and which the hell has arranged to be permanently insufficient. Brian, an intelligence in a dog's body, which we have already established in the theory about what he is in the specific hell of being unable to be recognized as what he knows himself to be. He is a person pretending to be a dog, or a mind pretending to be an animal, in a world that will only ever give him credit for the animal part. His literary ambitions fail. His relationships are marked by the strangeness of what he is. His intelligence goes unrecognized by the people who should recognize it because they can only see the container. The hell of not being seen is, for a person who most deeply needed to be seen, the most precisely targeted possible suffering. Peter, a person who wanted everything immediately and acted without thought for consequence, is in the hell of a person who gets what he wants and destroys it in the getting, over and over, without the capacity to learn from the destruction, because learning would require the sustained attention that impulsive people cannot sustain. He has everything he wanted: family, friends, house, bar, the full apparatus of the life he imagined, and he cannot hold on to any of it properly. He damages it continuously, not maliciously, with the helpless continuity of a person whose inability to not do this is the deepest and most fixed thing about them. Meg is in the hell of the person who wanted most to belong and never does, to be loved and is not, to matter to her family and is treated as though she does not. Every desire she has is visible, named, entirely ordinary, and entirely denied. The hell is that. The thing she wants is not exotic or unreasonable. She just wants to be a person her family loves. This is the most basic thing a person can want, and it is the thing most permanently withheld from her. Chris, in the version of the theory that takes the TV trope's purgatory framework seriously, was in life a person who used social power to harm someone more vulnerable than himself. The purgatory makes him the person he harmed dim, overlooked, unpopular, the subject of others' casual contempt. He is living the experience of his victim. He does not recognize this because the person he is now does not have the cognitive architecture to recognize this level of structural irony. His hell is also his blindness. He cannot learn the lesson because the lesson requires a kind of meta-awareness that his current state does not permit. The TV trope's version of this theory includes, in one of its most striking details, the suggestion that Brian and Stewie are the demons assigned to the purgatory beings who keep the system running, who prevent anyone from escaping their lessons prematurely, who ensure that the conditions remain those in which growth is possible. This gives Stewie's time machine a specific function. Overseers of a post-mortem space would need the capacity to move through time in order to maintain the conditions of the space properly, to make corrections when the timeline deviates in ways that prevent the lessons from being accessible. Stewie's technology is not a character quirk. It is occupational equipment. The most philosophically interesting version of this theory is the one that asks about the difference between hell and purgatory, between a space designed for punishment and a space designed for growth, and concludes that the show is ambiguous about which it is depicting. If purgatory, the characters can eventually graduate. The changes Stewie shows across the seasons are real progress. The occasional moments of genuine growth and connection and warmth that even the darkest periods of the show produce are evidence that the system is working, slowly and imperfectly, but working. If hell, the stasis is permanent. The characters will always be exactly who they are, in exactly this configuration, unable to change because the system is designed to prevent change rather than produce it. The repetition is not a pause between lessons, it is the final state. The show does not resolve this question. It has been running long enough that both interpretations can find support in what it contains. It has produced episodes of genuine warmth that feel like progress, and episodes of sustained darkness that feel like stasis. It has allowed Stewie to grow and refused to allow Meg to. It has given Brian moments of real grace and followed them with episodes of spectacular cruelty. The question of whether anyone on Spooner Street is moving towards something or simply in something is one the show has been declining to answer for over 20 years. Perhaps the answer is both, for different characters, on different days. Perhaps purgatory and hell are not as different as the traditions that produce these concepts believed them to be. Perhaps the difference between them is just the presence or absence of the belief that it can end. And some characters on this show believe it can end, and some do not. And the ones who believe it can end are, in every episode, the ones it is still worth watching. Section 11. The children know hidden awareness and what they see that the adults cannot. There is a moment in an episode of Family Guy where Stewie looks directly at the camera. Not in the theatrical, comedy-oriented way the show has used this gesture many times. Not winking at the audience as part of a self-aware joke, just looking, with a stillness in the face that reads as recognition rather than performance. For a beat that is slightly too long to be accidental, with an expression that does not have the quality of a joke's timing. It has the quality of acknowledgement, of one conscious being recognizing the presence of another. The theory of hidden awareness proposes that the Griffin children, Stewie, Meg, and Chris each carry, in their different ways and at their different levels of articulation, a form of knowledge that the adults around them do not possess. They know something. They are oriented toward the truth of their situation in a way that Peter and Lois, for all their adult competence and social sophistication, are insulated from. They see what is actually happening. They are simply, for a variety of reasons, unable to act on what they see in ways that change anything. Stewie's awareness is the most explicit and the most extensively evidenced by the show itself. He operates with tools and knowledge that presuppose an understanding of reality structure that no one-year-old child should have access to. His time machine is the most obvious example, but it is part of a broader pattern. Stewie regularly demonstrates knowledge of the show's own history, access to dimensions of reality that the human characters cannot perceive, and a quality of orientation toward the world that suggests he is not navigating it as a participant in an ordinary life, but as someone who has a map of something larger than the life he is nominally living. The version of Stewie's awareness that is most genuinely unsettling is the one that suggests he is aware that he is in a story. Not in the theatrical way the show has used this awareness for comedy characters on Family Guy, regularly acknowledge the camera, reference the show's own existence, make jokes about their own narrative situation. That is a comedy device. What the theory describes is something more fundamental. Stewie knows the structure. He knows that the world he is in is not the only world and is not final. He knows that there is something on the other side of the camera, and that what is on the other side of the camera is relevant to his situation in some way he cannot fully articulate, but also cannot fully dismiss. His time machine, in this reading, is not just a plot device. It is evidence of a mind that has been thinking about the nature of time in a way that only makes sense if you understand that time, in the world you are in, is not simply a one-directional flow from past to future. If you know, if some part of you knows, at whatever level this kind of knowledge operates, that time in your world is accessible, that it has been accessed, that it can be altered, then building a machine to access it is a natural extension of what you already understand. Stewie builds a time machine the way you would build something if you already knew that the thing you were building was possible. Not as an invention, as a demonstration. The glance at the camera when it occurs is the most direct expression of this awareness. He is looking at the people watching him. He knows they are there. He cannot do anything with this knowledge. The structure of his situation does not permit him to communicate directly with the people outside the frame. But he can acknowledge. He can let the acknowledgement exist for a moment, in the stillness between one comic beat and the next, before the show sweeps them both back into the ordinary rhythm of the episode. Meg's awareness operates on a completely different register. Where Stewie's is metaphysical, oriented toward the structure of reality, Meg's is social and emotional, oriented toward the structure of her family. She has spent more time than anyone else in the show being the designated target of a system that needs a target, which means she has spent more time than anyone else observing that system from the position of its primary subject. You learn a great deal about how a system works when you are the person it is working on. You learn the rhythms, the triggers, the specific ways in which each player in the system contributes to its maintenance. You learn to see it clearly, because clarity is one of the few resources available to you when all the other resources have been removed. Meg sees her family with an accuracy that the show deploys in Seahorse Seashell Party in the most concentrated and direct form the show has ever allowed her. But the theory suggests the awareness is present throughout the series, not just in that one episode. It is visible in the quality of her endurance, in the way she continues to show up, to engage, to try, season after season, without the kind of breakdown or exit that straightforward victimhood would predict. This is not the behavior of someone who does not understand what is happening to them. It is the behavior of someone who understands very well what is happening to them, and has made a calculated decision to continue participating in it anyway. Her occasional moments of genuine strength, the episodes where she fights back, where she displays competence, where the self that exists beneath the scapegoat function is briefly visible, are not anomalies. They are evidence of what has been present the entire time, simply not permitted expression. The theory notes that the writers who gave Meg the most agency and dignity tend to be female writers, specifically the women who were added to the Family Guy writing room in the later seasons as the show began to reckon, unevenly and imperfectly, with its own treatment of its female characters. These writers did not invent a new Meg. They found the one who had always been there underneath the role and gave her room to show up. Chris's awareness is the quietest and in some ways the strangest. Chris appears by every obvious measure to be the member of the Griffin family with the least self-awareness. He is slow, unfocused, easily distracted. He says things that do not track the context they are said in. He is consistently underestimated by the people around him, including the show itself. But Chris draws. He draws consistently and, in certain episodes, with genuine skill. And drawing the real kind, the kind that produces images worth looking at, requires a particular relationship with observation. An artist notices the world in a specific way. They extract detail, identify form, perceive relationships between things that non-artists walk past without registering. An artist's intelligence, when it is the real thing, is not the verbal, linear, analytically explicit intelligence that standardized measures of cognitive function tend to reward. It is perceptual, spatial, relational. It produces people who cannot easily explain what they know, but who can show it, who can put what they have perceived about the world into a form that other people can then receive. Chris, in the theory's most generous reading, is an artist in this sense. His difficulty with verbal articulation is not evidence that he sees less than the people around him. It is evidence that he processes what he sees differently. His non-sequitur observations, the comments that seem to come from nowhere, that do not track the conversation they interrupt, are the verbal equivalent of the kind of drawing that captures something true about a subject at the expense of the kind of accuracy that a photograph would provide. He notices something. He says it. It does not fit the context because it came from a different kind of attention than the context was paying. The hidden awareness theory, taken together across all three children, produces a reading of the Griffin family that is almost unbearably poignant. The three people in the household with the clearest perception of what is actually happening are the three people with the least power to change it. The child who understands the metaphysical structure of the world cannot act on that understanding without being dismissed as a baby. The teenage girl who understands the family's social structure cannot act on that understanding without being dismissed as the scapegoat. The boy who sees the world with an artist's precision cannot translate his perception into language that the people around him would receive as information rather than as confusion. And the two adults who have the most power, who make the decisions, who set the terms of the household, they are the ones who see the least. Who are most insulated from the actual truth of their situation by the very competence they use to manage it. Peter is too impulsive to observe. Lois is too managed to be vulnerable. Neither of them is capable of the kind of stillness that genuine awareness requires. And so the children see, and the adults miss. And the gap between what is being perceived and what is being acted on is the space the whole show has been running in for more than 20 years. Section 12. The Grand Unified Theory. Everything connects, everything holds. Let us pull all the way back now. Let us look at everything we have built across this long night and see if it resolves into something that holds together. Because when you lay all of these theories next to each other, the grief theory, the perspective theory, the human mind in a dog theory, the scapegoat, the impossible house, the monster hiding in the maternal performance, the supernatural neighbor, the closed purgatorial universe, the flexible death, the children who know when you lay all of these things in the same space and look at them together, what you find is not a collection of competing interpretations. You find a convergence. A set of readings that, in their deep logic, in the structural level rather than the surface detail, are all saying the same thing. The world of Family Guy is not what it appears to be. This is the sentence every theory we have explored reaches for, in its own vocabulary. Whether the setting is a mind in a hospital room, a simulation in a CIA tank, a suburb in purgatory, the inner world of a 1-year-old, or something else entirely, the reading in every case is: there is a surface and there is something beneath the surface, and the surface has been working very hard for a very long time to prevent you from noticing what is underneath it. The Grand Unified Theory is the proposition that all of these readings are compatible, that they are in fact different facets of the same underlying observation, approached from different angles by different people, who all noticed the same structural peculiarity in the show and followed it as far as their particular frames of reference allowed them to go. Here is how it holds together. Begin with Peter. Whatever the framework, madness, simulation, purgatory, construction, Peter is the gravitational center of the show's world. The world exists in its current form because of what has happened to him and because of what he is. He is the one whose grief, whose guilt, whose appetite, whose impulsiveness, whose love, however distorted, however expressed, is the engine of everything. The show's world is shaped by him. It reflects him. It is, in the most important sense, for him. Whether that means it is a construction his mind built to survive tragedy, or a simulation designed to study him, or a purgatory designed to teach him, or a cosmos organized around his particular failures, he is at the center of it. Everything else is arranged in relation to him. Lois is the force that keeps him anchored. Whatever her specific nature in each theory, the managed housewife, the hidden manipulator, the soul working through her particular lesson, she is the person to whom Peter's world is most fundamentally oriented. She is in the construction because he needed her in it. She is in the purgatory because she was bound to him in ways that death did not resolve. She is in the simulation because she is who he thinks about. She is load-bearing. The house on Spooner Street stands on whatever she and Peter are to each other, which is complicated in ways the show has never fully resolved, and which the theories suggest cannot be resolved because resolution would require a kind of honesty between them that neither character is currently capable of. Brian is the witness. In every framework, Brian occupies the same functional position, the one who sees most clearly and is least able to act on what he sees. He is human enough to observe with human accuracy, and constrained enough by his situation that observation is essentially all he can do. He keeps the gun because he knows, in the way that things are known when they are deeply and persistently true, that the situation is wrong. He cannot fully name what is wrong. He cannot fully explain it to anyone who would understand. He cannot change it. He can only see it and carry the seeing, and reach periodically for the martini glass and the book and the conversation as the only things he has found that make the carrying bearable. Stewie is the show's self-awareness externalized into a character. He is the part of the text that knows it is a text. Whether as an infant's imagination, a purgatorial overseer, a CIA simulation's most sophisticated element, or a genuine genius who has read the room accurately. Stewie has information about the nature of the situation that is simply not available to the other characters. He cannot share this information in any direct way, but he can gesture toward it. He can build machines that should not exist. He can access time in ways that should not be possible. He can look at the camera. These are not superpowers the show has given him for narrative convenience. They are the marks of a consciousness that is operating at a level the show's ordinary physics were not designed to accommodate. Meg is the show's conscience. In a world without permanent consequences, she is the character whose suffering accumulates and means something. In a world where cruelty is laughed off and forgotten, she is the record. She keeps the tally. Not because she chose to, she did not choose to, but because the role was assigned to her. And she has been filling it with a dignity that the show almost never acknowledges, and the theories restore. Her awareness of her own situation, her conscious choice to continue absorbing what the family directs at her, because she can see that the alternative is worse, this is the most morally serious act in the entire show. Performed by the character the show has been least serious about. This is the bitterest irony in a show built on irony. Chris is the record keeper in the mode of the unnarrated. He draws. He observes. He sees with an accuracy that he cannot translate into the language the people around him would receive as information. He is the show's silent camera, the stillness at the center of a very loud world, taking in what the loud world does and holding it without comment because comment is not his native mode. The town is wherever the story needs it to be, because it is not a physical space. It is the territory of a mind, or a simulation, or a purgatory organized by necessity rather than geography, responsive to what the story requires rather than to the physics of matter. Its shifting architecture is not a continuity failure. It is an honest expression of the kind of space it occupies. Mental spaces do not hold still. Constructed realities are responsive. Purgatories are arranged around what the inhabitants need to experience, which changes as they change, or fails to change as they fail to. And death, the show's death, the robed and voiced and argumentative death, who shows up and can be negotiated with, is not a threat. He is a reminder of what the characters are in proximity to, of what they have perhaps already passed through, of the fact that, in this world, the final word has not been said about any of them, which is either the most hopeful or the most frightening fact available about their situation, depending on which theory you bring to the question of why. Now zoom all the way out to the furthest possible perspective. Stand back from every individual theory and look at the shape they make together. What you see is this. A show about a dysfunctional family has, over 20+ years, accumulated enough internal texture that a community of attentive people has been able to find, within it, a sustained meditation on grief, on the lengths a person will go to protect themselves from unbearable loss, on the ways that guilt expresses itself when it cannot be named directly, on the function of cruelty in family systems that are not healthy enough to process their own dysfunction honestly, on what it means to be trapped in a situation you can see clearly but cannot change, on the specific suffering of people who are assigned roles they did not choose, and the different ways that human beings respond to that assignment. The show did not intend to be this. It was never designed to carry this weight. The people who made it were, for most of its run, primarily trying to land the joke on time and get the episode done. But the show is long, and the characters are specific, and the audience has been attentive in ways the creators did not fully anticipate. And what attentive people do with long, specific things is find the patterns that the creators embedded unconsciously and follow them into the dark and discover there's something that was always in the material, even when nobody was planning to put it there. The world of Family Guy is not what it appears to be. The show that looks, from a distance, like a chaotic animated comedy about a stupid man in Rhode Island is, upon sustained attention, a portrait of grief and guilt and love and the specific ways that human beings build elaborate structures to protect themselves from the truths they cannot survive facing directly. This is what the theories have been building toward. This is what all of them, in their different ways, with their different vocabulary and their different evidence, have been circling. Not a clever reinterpretation of a television show. A recognition that the things we build to make ourselves laugh are often also the things we build to make ourselves survivable. That comedy is not the absence of sadness. That sometimes it is sadness dressed in the only thing that makes it possible to carry. You have been in that recognition for several hours now. The light around you is probably low. The sounds outside have probably settled into the specific quiet of late night. The show you thought you knew looks, at this particular moment, a little different than it did before this video started. Not worse, just more. More layered, more human, more concerned, underneath all the chaos and the cutaway gags and the deliberately offensive jokes, with something that is actually worth being concerned with. Sleep well, if sleep is where you are heading. And if it is not, if you are wide awake in the dark with the theories still turning over, that is all right too. The turning is part of it. The sitting with things that do not fully resolve is part of it. These are the kinds of stories that are supposed to keep you company for a little while. And if they have done that tonight, then they have done what they were for. If this was the company you needed tonight, please subscribe. It genuinely helps more than I can properly explain, and it means you will not miss what comes next. Drop a comment below with where you watched this from and what time it was when you finally hit stop. I collect these the way other people collect photographs. Every time stamp in every city is a little proof that somewhere in the world, someone was awake in the dark letting a story do its thing. Thanks for being here. Truly. Sleep well. End of script. Expansion. Section A. Deeper into Peter's mind. The architecture of constructed grief. The Peter Griffin insanity theory deserves more than a single pass. Because when you really sit with it, when you follow every thread, it produces rather than just the main trunk of the argument. The theory generates implications that extend far beyond the central premise of a man in a room, building a world to survive his grief. These implications are scattered through the show's 20-plus seasons like pieces of evidence in a very long case file, and assembling them produces something more detailed and more devastating than the core theory alone. Consider the structure of the constructed world's humor. Family Guy is, on its surface, a comedy, a cartoon, a show designed to produce laughter through absurdity and transgression, and the particular pleasure of watching characters in situations that exceed normal human experience. But the specific character of the humor, what it finds funny, where it reaches for its laughs, what it is willing to do to produce a reaction from the audience, has a quality that distinguishes it from other animated comedies in a way that the insanity theory illuminates. The humor of Family Guy is consistently organized around the collision between ordinary domestic life and catastrophic excess. Peter does not have mild misadventures. He has catastrophic ones, scaled far beyond anything a real person's life would contain. The family does not experience ordinary family difficulties. They experience surreal extremities that violate the ordinary rules of consequence and physics. Even in the most domestic episodes, there is an undertow of excess of things going further than they should, of consequences being both impossible and somehow precisely tailored to the emotional situation. This is the humor of a mind that has lost all capacity for the middle register. In ordinary grief, the world flattens. Things that used to have texture lose it. The ordinary pleasures and frustrations of daily life become distant and muffled. One of the ways that minds in extreme distress sometimes respond to this flattening is by generating experiences that are exaggerated enough to penetrate the numbness. If the ordinary cannot be felt, the extraordinary might be. If real life has become too heavy to exist inside normally, a constructed version of real life can be tuned to a pitch of absurdity that bypasses whatever is blocking access to feeling. The humor of Family Guy, in this reading, is the humor of a mind searching for frequencies that can still get through, reaching for something large and loud enough to penetrate the silence of grief. This would explain the show's tendency toward violence that is played as comedy violence, that in most contexts would be horrifying, but that the show insists on framing as funny. The constructed world, in which no consequence is permanent and no injury accumulates in the way real injuries accumulate, is the perfect environment for this kind of humor. You can laugh at things that would be unbearable in reality precisely because the constructed world has taken the permanence out of them. Nothing you see here will actually hurt anyone. Everyone will be fine next episode. The violence is safe because it is not real, and it is not real because Peter's mind, having survived the most violent non-comedic event imaginable, cannot afford to build a world where the violence lands. There is a specific way the theory handles Brian's death and resurrection, and it is more affecting than the theory usually takes time to explore. Brian's death hit by a car, replaced by Vinny, restored by Stewie's time intervention, is widely understood within the fan community as a rating stunt, a cheap shock deployed to generate attention and then immediately retracted. The insanity theory proposes something different. In the constructed world that Peter's mind has built, Brian is the closest thing to a real companion Peter has. The visits from Cleveland and Quagmire are the only genuine human contact the real Peter gets. Brian the dog is present between those visits, offering the kind of uncomplicated, non-judgmental company that grief makes you reach for. In the constructed world, Brian has been elevated to full personhood, made articulate, made complex, made capable of the real conversations that Peter's mind needs to have but cannot have with the absent family he is grieving. Brian's death in the constructed world, then, is the constructed equivalent of the real Peter losing something that matters to him. It is a grief inside the grief, a loss within the constructed space that was built to make loss survivable. And the reversal, Stewie going back in time to save Brian, the restoration of the status quo is the constructed world's reflexive defense mechanism activating. The same mechanism that never allows anything to be permanently lost, activating to undo a loss that came too close to the real losses underlying everything. The theory does not place the reversal in Stewie's hands by accident. It is Stewie, the unborn child, the greatest potential, the thing Peter most loves and most grieves because it never got to exist, who saves Brian. The potential that was taken restores what the present almost lost. This is not the show doing something casual for ratings. In the grammar of the theory, it is the most precise statement about grief and love and the way a mind in extremity organizes its defenses that the show has ever accidentally made. One more layer, the show's relationship with its own history. Family Guy has, across its run, repeatedly revisited and revised its own past. Characters' backstories are inconsistent. Events that were presented as definitive in one season are contradicted or quietly replaced in another. The show's internal timeline does not hold together under any close examination. Characters refer to ages and timelines and historical events in ways that cannot be mathematically reconciled with each other. The insanity theory offers a clean explanation for this. A mind in grief is not a reliable archivist of its own history. It revises the past continuously, not with deliberate dishonesty, but with the organic, unavoidable revisionism of memory under emotional pressure. We do not remember our history neutrally. We remember it through the filter of what we need it to mean in the present. The constructed world's inconsistent history is the history of a mind that keeps returning to the same events and finding different things in them, because what it needs from them changes as the grief shifts and evolves. Peter's mind is not building a consistent story. It is building a livable one. And livable and consistent are not the same thing. They almost never are. Expansion Section B. The full Stewie problem time, agency, and the baby who knows too much. The Stewie perspective theory gains considerably more texture when you follow it into the episodes the show has produced that seem, on their face, to be about something other than a child's imagination constructing a narrative. Consider the time travel episodes. Stewie's time machine is the show's most persistent violation of the logic of a normal animated sitcom. Time travel requires a relationship with causality that cannot be explained by any ordinary account of who Stewie is. A one-year-old child, even an extraordinary one, even a prodigy of literally impossible proportions, does not develop the theoretical physics necessary to build a functioning time machine. This is not a question of intelligence. It is a question of knowledge base. You cannot build a device whose operation requires knowledge of temporal mechanics before you have encountered temporal mechanics. The knowledge has to come from somewhere. The perspective theory offers one explanation. Stewie does not actually build anything. The time machine is an imaginative construct, a prop in the inner drama of a child whose imagination is enormously sophisticated. The time travel adventures are Stewie's way of playing with the concept of time with the deep, early childhood intuition that time is something that can be moved through, that the past is accessible, that things that happened do not have to have happened the way they happened. This is, in fact, one of the central preoccupations of early childhood development. Very young children have a fundamentally different relationship with time than adults do. The past and the future are less fixed for them. The distinction between what is happening, what happened, and what might happen is more porous. Young children frequently discuss past events as though they are still happening, or future events as though they have already occurred. This is not confusion. Exactly. It is a different relationship with temporal reality than the one adults have learned to inhabit. Stewie's time machine, in the perspective theory, is the external representation of this relationship, the child's sense that time is navigable given form as a piece of engineering. But there is a second, darker version of this explanation, and it is the one that the theory's most unsettling readers tend to gravitate toward. In this version, Stewie builds the time machine because he has already been through time, because the world he is in is not the first version of the world he has been in, because some part of him carries the memory, however fragmentary, however dimly accessible, of having been here before, in versions of this house and this family that did not end well, and of having found his way back through the machine that he builds, partly so that he can find his way back again if necessary. This version of the theory connects to the purgatory reading. In a purgatorial space, characters are not there for the first time. They have lived through something that brought them to this place. The specific contours of the purgatory, the specific ways in which each character's situation surfaces, what they need to surface, are determined by what came before. And if Stewie has access, through his time machine or through whatever other mechanism the purgatorial space allows, to the experience of previous iterations, previous times through the lesson, previous versions of the family that ended differently, then his knowledge of time is not a theoretical achievement. It is an experiential one. He has been here before. He knows how certain paths end. He knows which ones lead to Brian dying, and he has decided that this is one he will not allow. This is not the behavior of an overseer doing a job. It is the behavior of someone who has loved something and survived losing it and will not survive losing it again. The emotional weight of the Christmas Guy episode lands differently in this light. Stewie's grief at Brian's death, raw, sustained, barely containable, is not the grief of someone experiencing loss for the first time. It has the quality of recognition, of something being confirmed as terrible that was always feared to be terrible, of a wound reopening rather than being newly inflicted. And his decision to go back, to break whatever rules govern the use of the device, to burn one of his time travel opportunities on the saving of one specific person, this is not impulsive. It is carefully chosen. He knows the cost. He knows what he is spending. He chooses to spend it. This is what the show has always said about Stewie, underneath the evil genius costume, underneath the British accent and the world domination schemes, and the weapons that should not fit in a nursery. It has always been saying that he loves Brian more than he loves anything else in this world. And the time machine is, among other things, the mechanism by which he ensures that what he loves most cannot be permanently taken. Expansion Section C. The Quagmire Dossier: Additional Evidence for the Impossible Neighbor. The incubus theory gains additional texture from the details the show has scattered across its run about Quagmire's relationship with time, with memory, and with the specific ways in which his existence exceeds ordinary human parameters. There are episodes in which Quagmire refers to events that predate the neighborhood's current configuration, references to times and places and situations that suggest a history longer than the show's own timeline allows. 4. These are usually treated as throwaway lines, the show being inconsistent about a supporting character's backstory because it is not particularly worried about supporting character backstories. But taken together, they sketch a portrait of someone who was here before the Griffins and will be here after them. Someone whose relationship with this specific geographic and social location is older and more permanent than ordinary human residency would produce. His relationship with other supernatural or semi-supernatural elements of the show's world is worth noting. Family Guy has, across its run, explicitly incorporated demonic entities, angels, God, death, and other non-human beings into its world. These encounters are usually played for comedy, but the consistent presence of these figures in the show's mythology suggests that the world of the show has a supernatural layer that is real within its own logic, rather than simply a joke. Quagmire exists in this world. He exists in the same world as the actual death and the actual God and the actual demons that show up in explicit form in various episodes. And his impossibility, his agelessness, his immunity, his impossible success rate is of a piece with that world's supernatural architecture, rather than, in contrast to it. The theory's most careful readers have noted a specific quality to Quagmire's relationship with the people around him that distinguishes his interactions from those of the human characters. He observes, he watches, in group scenes, in bar scenes, in the social situations that make up much of the show's texture. Quagmire is frequently positioned slightly outside the immediate exchange present, attending, but not quite inside the social moment in the way that the human characters are. He has the quality of someone who is waiting, patiently, for the scene to resolve itself in the way that all such scenes eventually resolve, because he has been through enough of them to know how they tend to go. He is also, notably, the character who delivers the most accurate assessment of any other character that the show produces. The speech about Brian, which names Brian's specific failures with a precision that suggests either very careful attention or a very long observational period, is not the speech of someone who has simply gotten annoyed. It is the speech of someone who has been watching long enough to see clearly, who has maintained enough distance from the social performance to identify the gap between the performance and the reality underneath it. This is a capacity that comes from practice, from having watched many people over a long time and developed, through that watching, the ability to see through the particular ways that human beings deceive themselves and each other. An entity that has been doing what Quagmire does moving through human communities, being present, observing, participating in the specific human activity that sustains him for decades or centuries or longer, would develop exactly this quality of accurate, unsentimental assessment. He is not perceptive because he is smart, he is perceptive because he is old. Expansion Section D. The secondary characters and what they know. Joe, Cleveland, and the network of witnesses. The theories we have explored have focused primarily on the Griffin family and their immediate inner circle. But the secondary characters of the show, Joe Swanson, Cleveland Brown, and the various recurring figures who populate the edges of the story, carry their own theoretical weight. They are not simply furniture. They are, in various readings, witnesses, reflections, or participants in whatever the underlying reality of the show actually is. Joe Swanson's function in the show has always been ambiguous in a way that the surface narrative never quite resolves. He is introduced as the cool, capable, heroic neighbor, the one Peter initially envies because Joe possesses the qualities of masculine competence and social admiration that Peter aspires to but cannot achieve. Over time, the show has treated Joe progressively less well. His disability becomes a punchline, his marriage deteriorates, his friends mock him in ways that feel disproportionate to whatever the comedy of his situation is supposed to be. He goes from being the person everyone looks up to being the person everyone looks past. This trajectory, in the insanity theory, reflects the degradation of the construction. In the early, more coherent version of the constructed world, Joe represents Peter's idealized neighbor, the version of masculinity and community standing that Peter's actual grief and institutionalization have taken from him. As the construction ages and the coherence degrades, even the idealized figures begin to decline. Joe's descent from aspiration to punchline is the constructed world's representation of Peter's declining hope that the things he lost could be approximated in the world he built to replace them. In the purgatory theory, Joe's specific situation, the disability, the wheelchair, the way his heroic identity is constrained by physical limitation, is his sentence. He was, in life, someone who used physical prowess and social status in ways that damaged other people, perhaps someone who benefited from physical superiority in situations where physical superiority conferred unfair advantage. The purgatory has placed him in a body that cannot move freely, in a community where his former basis for identity is permanently unavailable. The lesson is, you are not your body. Your worth is not your capability. He is working on it. Cleveland's role in the insanity theory has already been established. He is one of the real-world visitors who comes to sit with Peter, and his absence from the main show and presence in his own spin-off show represents a period when these visits became less frequent. But the purgatory theory offers a different reading. Cleveland, in whatever life preceded his purgatorial assignment, was someone who allowed harm to continue around him by being a passive presence, someone who saw things happening and did not intervene, not from malice but from the specific cowardice of wanting to stay comfortable and uninvolved. His purgatory places him in a community where people around him consistently make choices that he can see are wrong, where the dynamics around him are consistently harmful, and where his role is to be there without being able to stop what is happening. He is being asked to feel, very directly, what it costs to be a bystander. Whether he is learning the lesson or not is an open question that the show, perhaps wisely, does not fully answer. The show's relationship with its own secondary cast, taken as a whole, suggests an awareness that the people at the edges of a story carry weight that the central narrative does not always have time to fully account for. The secondary characters of Family Guy are more consistently drawn, more emotionally coherent, more stable across the show's run than the main characters in some respects. They are not subject to the same pressures of flanderization that have distorted Peter, Brian, and Stewie. They remain, in some sense, closer to who they started as. The theory reads this as meaningful. In a constructed or purgatorial space, the figures at the periphery are less subject to the pressures that deform the central characters, precisely because less of the narrative's weight is resting on them. They can afford to be more consistent because the show's core anxieties, whatever is driving the distortion of the central characters, are not being channeled through them. They are the stable background against which the instability of the foreground becomes visible. And their relative stability is itself a clue that the instability of the main characters is not random creative drift, but something more structured and more purposeful. Expansion Section E. The Show Within the Show. Brian Griffin as author. One of the most elegantly constructed theories in the Family Guy fan community is the one that proposes Brian Griffin is not simply a character in the show, he is the author of it. The theory proposes that the events depicted in Family Guy are, within the world of the show, a novel that Brian has been writing. His long gestating book, the one he never quite finishes, the one he keeps saying he is working on, the one that has become the standing joke of his literary pretensions, is not a failure of ambition or discipline, it is Family Guy. The show we are watching is the book Brian has been writing. And the specific character of the show, its absurdism, its inconsistency, its progressive deterioration of internal logic, its tendency toward meanness and excess as the season's progress can be explained as the evolution of a writer and his manuscript across years of composition. The theory's earliest evidence is simple and structural. Brian and Stewie are, by a considerable margin, the two characters given the most complex and interesting inner lives on the show. They are the two characters whose episodes tend to be the most praised by critics and fans. They are the two characters who have something like a genuine arc, a real history, a relationship with genuine stakes. They are the two characters about whom the show has the most specific and consistent information, because Brian has experienced their adventures directly and is drawing on that direct experience as his source material. Peter, in this reading, is drawn from Brian's observation of Peter rather than from any interior access. This explains why Peter's characterization, enormously vivid and specific in some respects, wildly inconsistent in others, has the quality of someone rendered from the outside rather than from within. Brian knows how Peter moves through the world. He does not know what Peter is like when he is alone. So, the written Peter is full and detailed in his public behavior and oddly thin in his private moments, because Brian's information about him is bounded by the observational position Brian actually occupies in Peter's life. The progressive deterioration of the show across its seasons, the increasing meanness, the decreasing coherence, the growing reliance on cutaway gags at the expense of actual story maps, in this theory, onto the progressive deterioration of Brian's own mental and emotional state across the same period. A writer's output reflects the writer. As Brian becomes more anxious, more self-defeating, more reliant on alcohol as a management strategy, his writing becomes more anxious, more self-defeating, more reliant on disconnected comic moments as a management strategy. The Flanderization of the characters is not the writing room running out of ideas. It is a novelist who has been living inside his material for too long, who has started to see his characters in simplified and distorted ways because the emotional distance required for good characterization has collapsed under the pressure of proximity. The alcohol is a significant detail in this reading. Alcoholism in writers is, historically speaking, not an uncommon phenomenon. It is associated with a specific kind of creative problem, the need to maintain access to the emotional material that good writing requires, while also managing the anxiety that this access produces. A writer who is getting too close to something painful in their material sometimes drinks to manage the pain while continuing to work. And as the drinking increases, the quality of the judgment required for good writing decreases. The work suffers. Not because the writer is less talented, because the tool they are using to manage their relationship with the work is the same tool that is now interfering with their capacity to do the work. This would explain one of the most frequently noted patterns in Family Guy's history. The show is at its best when Brian and Stewie are at its center, and at its worst when it is furthest from them. In the theory's reading, Brian writes the Stewie and Brian episodes with the most care and the most access, because these are the episodes that are most directly drawn from his own experience. He and Stewie actually did these things. He has the memories to draw from. The rest of the show, the broader Griffin family life, the town, the secondary characters is the material he has assembled from observation and imagination, and the quality varies with the distance between himself and the source. The meta layer of the theory, the one that is almost too clever to take seriously but turns out to be surprisingly worth sitting with, is the question of who is publishing the book. Family Guy, as a book, is a commercial success of some kind. It runs for multiple seasons, which in the analogy means it finds an audience and keeps it for a sustained period. Brian has wanted literary success his entire adult life. He has failed to achieve it repeatedly and visibly. And here, in the theory's most wry suggestion, is the success he eventually finds. Not the serious literary novel he always imagined for himself, but a sprawling, inconsistent, increasingly absurd story about his family that people cannot stop reading despite or because of its flaws. The self-help book he publishes within the show's narrative, Wish It, Want It, Do It, is the commercial work that funds the real work. The book that sells is not the book he cares about. The book he cares about is the one we are watching. And like most art that its maker cares most deeply about, it is the one that the world has the most complicated relationship with, loved deeply by some, derided loudly by others, and impossible to stop returning to regardless of how you feel about its quality. Expansion Section F. The final theory: the show is telling you the truth about itself. There is one last theory, the simplest one, the one that has been sitting underneath all the others the entire time. The theory is this: Family Guy knows exactly what it is, and has always known, and has been telling you so consistently across its entire run in the most direct way it is capable of. Not through hidden codes or buried narrative. Through the honest, direct expression of the show's own themes, which are not actually concealed at all if you watch for them. Family Guy is a show about a person who does not know how to stop, who does not know when enough is enough, who cannot find the off switch for whatever is driving him forward because the forward momentum is the only thing keeping him functional. This is Peter's story in its most literal, surface-level form. A man who cannot stop doing the next thing, who cannot sit still long enough to feel what is underneath the constant motion. But it is also the show's own story. A show that cannot stop. That has run past any reasonable stopping point and keeps going, because the going is what it knows how to do. That generates more and more extreme content, not because anyone particularly wants more extreme content, but because escalation is what happens when a thing cannot find its own ending. The fourth wall breaks are not just jokes. They are the show looking at itself and acknowledging what the fan theories have been saying for years. Something is wrong here. Something has gone further than it should. The characters who address the camera and talk about the declining quality of the writing, who make jokes about the show's own narrative failures, who acknowledge to the audience directly that things have gotten strange, these characters are telling the truth. They have always been telling the truth. The show uses the comedy framing to make the truth sayable, but the truth is there. The most honest moment in the entire run of Family Guy may be the Brian and Stewie Vault episode, which we have referenced multiple times across this video for a reason. In that episode, stripped of all the show's usual defensive mechanisms, no cutaway gags, no random jokes, no fourth wall breaks, no absurdist escalation, the show finds two characters sitting in a small space in the dark and being honest with each other. Brian tells the truth about his despair. Stewie tells the truth about his love, and the show, for 22 minutes, is a different thing than it usually is. It is quiet, it is attentive, it is, in the most straightforward sense of the word, good, better than almost anything else the show has produced. And this is the final theory. The show knows how to be this. It has always known. The episodes that are most respected, the Vault episode, the Stewie Kills Lois two-parter, Road to Rhode Island, the handful of others that fans return to with the warmth reserved for things that actually meant something, these are the episodes where the show stops being defended against itself and simply is what it is underneath all the noise. A story about a family, about people who love each other badly, about the specific ways that human beings fail the people they need most and cannot stop failing them and keep trying anyway, about grief and guilt and the elaborate structures that minds build when the truth is too heavy to carry without a scaffold. The theories we have explored tonight are the audience's way of finding this truth in the material when the show itself cannot quite say it directly. Every theory is, at its core, an act of generosity toward the show, an attempt to find the serious thing inside the joke, the sad thing inside the funny, the real story inside the constructed one. This is what attentive audiences do with things they love. They do not accept the surface as the whole story. They press on the surface until it gives up what is underneath. And what is underneath Family Guy, if you press on it with patience and good faith, is always something worth finding. A man in a room, a world built from love and grief, a family that is trying, imperfectly and continuously, to hold together in whatever way it can manage. This is what the theories have been pointing at the entire time. Good night. Full script complete. Estimated total word count, approximately 30,000 plus words across all sections. Expansion Section G. The Long Night, Meg's complete arc and what it cost. We have talked about Meg as a scapegoat. We have talked about her awareness of her own situation. We have talked about the single most damning episode in the show's history for how it treats her. But there is more to say, and the depth of what the theories find when they look at Meg's full arc across the show is worth exploring in the specific, season-by-season way that the central theories usually do not take the time to do. In Season 1, Meg is simply a teenager. She is unpopular. She has a crush on Kevin Swanson that goes nowhere. She tries, with the limited success of most teenagers, to be seen and liked by the people around her. The jokes about her in this season are gentle. They are the jokes of a show that has created a normal teenage girl and is finding the comedy in her normality, in the way her ordinary desires seem diminished by comparison to the extraordinary chaos of everything else in her. Family. She is the least interesting person in a maximally interesting household. This is a comedy situation. It is not cruelty. Season 2 and 3 continue this general characterization. The scapegoating is minimal. Peter's relationship with her, while not particularly warm or attentive, is not hostile in any sustained or structured way. He says things that are insensitive. He sometimes forgets she is in the room. This is the behavior of an inattentive father, which is a real thing and a real failure, but it is not the campaign of sustained contempt that later seasons will produce. The seeds are there, but the plant has not grown yet. The transition begins in Season 4. This is where the humor about Meg shifts in the specific way that the scapegoat theory identifies, from humor about her boringness to humor about her ugliness, her unwantedness, her fundamental inadequacy as a person. This shift represents a change in what kind of comedy is being made. Boring can be corrected, theoretically. Boring is about behavior. Ugly is about being. Making someone the target of humor about what they fundamentally are, rather than what they do, is a different kind of targeting. It removes any comedic distance. It says, the joke is you, not something you did. Why did this shift happen? The simplest explanation is that the writing room discovered it got a reaction and kept reaching for it. Audience response to Meg's mistreatment was measurable. People reacted strongly, either with laughter or with discomfort. And either reaction is a reaction, which in the attention economy of broadcast television is what counts. This is probably the accurate account of what happened in the writer's room. But the theory looks at what this shift produced and finds, even in the absence of any intended meaning, a pattern that is worth taking seriously. The escalation of Meg's treatment tracks almost precisely with the show's overall moral deterioration. The periods when the abuse is at its worst are the periods when the show is at its most critically derided, its most internally incoherent, its most hostile to its own characters. The periods when the abuse begins to moderate, when women are added to the writing staff, when Meg starts getting episodes that treat her with something like respect, are also the periods when the show recovers some of its creative capacity. Whether this is causal or simply correlated is not something the theory can establish with certainty, but the parallel is exact enough to be striking. The theory's most detailed readers have tracked specific episodes across the middle seasons that represent particularly intense expressions of the pattern. There is the episode in which a flashback reveals that Peter and Lois tried to abandon Meg at a fire station as an infant. The episode in which Peter tells Meg to her face that he does not love her. The episode in which the entire family participates in psychologically tormenting her in ways that, stripped of the comedy framing, would be described as a coordinated campaign of emotional abuse. Each of these episodes escalates from the previous baseline. Each one extends the range of what the show is willing to do to this character, and Meg keeps coming back. This is the thing about her that the theory finds most important and most difficult to explain through the simple mechanism of audience and writer indifference. She could theoretically be written out. She could be sidelined. She could be reduced to a background presence while the show focuses on characters it cares about more. Other shows have done exactly this with characters they did not know what to do with. Family Guy has not done this. Meg is always present, always there to absorb what is directed at her. always available for the next iteration of the joke that has become, over the seasons, less a joke than a structural feature of the show's identity. The theory proposes that Meg cannot be removed because she is doing something too important to the show's internal economy. She is the mechanism through which the show processes something it cannot otherwise acknowledge. The guilt, the meanness, the darkness that has accumulated in the show's character as it has evolved away from its warmer, more coherent early version, all of this has to go somewhere. Meg is where it goes. And as long as it goes there, as long as there is a vessel for the show's worst impulses, the rest of the show can continue to present itself as comedy rather than something more troubling. This is the show scapegoating itself through Meg, using her the way her family uses her, as the container for everything that cannot be faced directly. The show's own moral failures, its own increasing brutality, its own loss of the warmth and care that made it worth watching in the first place, all of it is directed at Meg, so that the rest of the show can continue as though none of that has happened. She is the show's own self-directed guilt, given a cartoon body and a pink hat and told to keep showing up every week and absorbing everything that cannot be admitted to. When the women join the writing staff and begin to advocate for her, when the episodes start appearing that give her dignity and competence and genuine emotional resolution, what is happening is not simply that her character is being rehabilitated. The show is beginning, tentatively and imperfectly, to face what it has been doing, to stop directing its own guilt outward onto a convenient target, to try, for a few episodes at a time, to be the show it was in its first 3 seasons, when it still believed that the people in the house cared about each other. It does not fully succeed. The rehabilitation is partial and inconsistent. The reset button keeps getting pressed, but the effort is there, and the effort is more than the theory expected to find, which is perhaps the most honest and most humane thing that can be said about the show's relationship with its most mistreated character. It does not know how to make things right, but something in it keeps trying. Expansion Section H. The reality beneath the comedy, what the show has always been trying to say. There is a version of every story that the story itself cannot quite tell, because telling it directly would require a different kind of story than the one it is. Comedy cannot fully occupy the space of tragedy. It can approach it, gesture toward it, circle it, and occasionally reach through it and touch it for a moment before retreating back into the safety of the joke. The best comedies are the ones that make this approach most honestly, that reach through the most frequently, that are least defensive about what they find when they get close to the territory the comedy is deflecting. Family Guy has, at its best, been one of these comedies. Not consistently, not in the way that its reputation sometimes denies, and its best episodes confirm. But the episodes that people return to, the ones that have accumulated the specific warmth that only things that mattered can accumulate, are the ones where the comedy dropped its defenses and let the actual feeling through. Brian and Stewie in the vault. The first time Stewie tells Brian something true about how much he matters. The Season 5 episode, Road to Rhode Island, in which Brian finds his biological mother and discovers she has died, and the show allows him 30 seconds of genuine, uncomediated grief in the middle of an episode that is otherwise something considerably lighter. The moment in Season 10's Seahorse Seashell Party when Meg stands in the kitchen and tells the truth, and the show is quiet enough to let her. These moments are not accidents. They are not the writing room momentarily losing control of the material and allowing something true to escape. They are the show being what it is underneath the performance, for just long enough to demonstrate that it knows what it is, that it has always known. That somewhere underneath the cutaway gags and the Conway Twitty performances and the escalating violence and the endless reset of every consequence, underneath all of that is a story about a family. About people who need each other and do not know how to be needed. About love expressed through the distorted grammar of people who have never been taught to express it directly. About the specific human tragedy of wanting to be a good family and being unable to find the way. The fan theories we have explored across this long night are, in aggregate, the audience's attempt to honor what the show has been doing in those moments when the defense dropped. The theories are elaborate and strange, and sometimes push their logic further than the evidence comfortably allows. But they are also, at their core, an expression of investment, of the specific depth of feeling that comes from caring about a piece of fiction enough to press on it until it gives up something real. You do not construct elaborate theories about things you do not care about. You construct them about things that got to you, things that lodged in you, things that you have been carrying since first encounter and cannot quite put down. The thousands of words of theorizing that exist about Family Guy online, the Reddit threads, the YouTube videos, the wiki pages, the late-night discussions are all, finally, evidence of how much the show has mattered to the people who watched it. How much the characters felt like real people. How much the house felt like a house that could be mapped and understood and returned to. How much something in the chaos and the cruelty and the occasional warmth felt, against all reason, like a reflection of something true about how families work. The grief theory is true in the way that the best theories are true, not literally, but emotionally. It says something accurate about the feeling of watching someone who cannot let go of the people they have lost. The scapegoat theory is true in the way that structural analyses of family dynamics are always true, not as a claim about what individuals in the family intended, but as a claim about what the patterns they inhabit produce and sustain. The Brian human brain theory is true in the way that metaphors for feeling trapped in the wrong life are always true, not as a description of actual CIA mind transfer procedures, but as an account of what it feels like to be unable to fully inhabit the life your consciousness knows it was designed for. All of these theories are true in this way. And this kind of truth, the emotional, structural, metaphorical truth that fiction is best at carrying, is worth exploring, worth following into the dark, worth spending several hours on, even when the content being explored is a cartoon that has been on the air so long it has outlasted multiple public conversations about its own quality. Because the show has mattered, in ways that its own public image often fails to honor. The early seasons produced something that people loved with the specific passion reserved for things that surprised them by being better than expected. The middle seasons, at their best, produced episodes that those same people have carried with them in the way you carry things that said something true about your life when you needed it said. And even the late seasons, degraded and inconsistent and often genuinely difficult to defend, have produced the occasional moment that justifies the entire long, strange enterprise. Seahorse Seashell Party is a bad episode, by most accounts. It fails its subject in the most painful way possible. But it also contains the scene where Meg stands in the kitchen and speaks truth. And that scene is worth something. It is worth more than most things the show has done in the years around it. It is worth following into the theories it generates. It is worth sitting with in the dark long after the episode has ended, asking what it means that this scene exists, that the show produced it, let it breathe, gave it the space to be as true as it is. What it means is that the show has always known what it was doing to Meg. It has never not known. And somewhere in the years of knowing and continuing anyway, it produced this scene as a kind of confession, not complete enough to change anything, not honest enough to fix what was broken, but honest enough to acknowledge the break. That acknowledgement is what all the best theories are doing, at scale, across the entire show. They are taking the show's confessions, the moments when the defense dropped, and something true came through and following them to wherever they lead. And wherever they lead is somewhere worth going. Sit with that for a while before you sleep. The show has been telling you the truth about itself. You have been listening. That matters. Complete script ends here. Total word count, approximately 30,000 plus words. Expansion Section 1. The chicken what the fight actually means. There is one more recurring element of the show that the theories have never fully accounted for, and it deserves its own treatment. The chicken fights. For those who may need a refresher, Peter Griffin has, across the show's run, had several extended, extraordinarily violent, and utterly consequence-free fights with a giant chicken named Ernie. These fights begin from a trivial slight. Ernie gives Peter a coupon that turns out to be expired and escalate into sequences of sustained physical combat that destroy property, inconvenience bystanders, and span enormous geographic and temporal distances, all before ending abruptly and leaving both combatants apparently no worse for the experience. They are among the show's most beloved running gags. They are also, the theory argues, among the show's most symbolically dense moments. What does a chicken fight mean in the context of a show that may be the constructed reality of a grieving mind? In the vocabulary of grief therapy, there is a concept sometimes called displaced aggression, the redirection of anger from its true target, which is usually the situation, or the loss, or the self, onto something else that is present and available and capable of absorbing the anger, without the emotional cost that directing it at its true target would involve. You are furious at the loss. You cannot fight the loss. So you fight the thing that is in front of you with a ferocity that is wildly disproportionate to the actual provocation, because the ferocity is not really about the provocation. It is about everything else. Peter's fights with the chicken begin from the most trivial of pretexts: an expired coupon. This is the theory's key detail. The anger that produces these catastrophic, building-destroying, physics-defying sequences of violence is so obviously not about a coupon that the show is almost making the point directly. Nobody fights like this about a coupon. Nobody sustains this level of physical and emotional investment in a conflict whose nominal origin is a discount not honored. The coupon is a placeholder. The real target is not Ernie. In the insanity theory, the chicken fights are the constructed world's externalization of Peter's rage at the accident, at the coupon that turned out to be worthless, at the night that turned out to cost everything instead of giving anything. The chicken is the stand-in for whatever or whoever Peter's mind needs to fight without being able to name the real fight. Ernie is always available. Ernie is always willing to engage. Ernie never requires Peter to be specific about why he is so angry. The fight happens, catastrophically, and then it ends, and both parties walk away, and nothing is resolved because nothing that the fight was actually about was addressed. This is exactly how displaced aggression works. You fight the stand-in. The fight is real. The violence is real. The effort and the injury and the sustained duration of it are all real. But because the stand-in is not the actual source of the anger, the fight does not resolve anything. You pick up afterward and the anger is still there, waiting for the next encounter, ready to erupt again from an equally trivial provocation. Because the provocation was never the point, the anger is the point. The provocation is just the door it walks through. The fact that Ernie also walks away from these encounters, that he is as damaged and as unbowed by the experience as Peter suggests, that the fight is not with something external at all. It is with a part of Peter himself. You cannot finally defeat an aspect of your own psychological makeup. You can exhaust yourself fighting it. You can do extraordinary damage in the process. But it walks away when you do, and it is there again the next time, with the same readiness and the same staying power, because it is you. The coupon fight never ends. That is the final truth of the recurring chicken encounter. It keeps coming back because the thing it represents keeps coming back. The grief, the rage, the unanswerable question of why things went the way they went and what could have been done differently, and whether any of it was preventable, and whether the answer to that question matters if the outcome was the same regardless. These are not questions that can be fought to resolution. They are the questions that grief generates endlessly, because grief does not actually want answers. It wants someone to fight, and the someone is always, ultimately, the self. Ernie walks away. Peter gets up. The sequence ends. The next time, it starts again from a trivial provocation. The show has been depicting the most accurate visualization of unresolved grief that an animated comedy has ever produced. And it has been doing so in the form of a man repeatedly fighting a giant chicken, and the audience has been laughing at it for 20 years. Because laughter is what you do when something is both funny and unbearable, and you cannot fully tell which is which. Expansion Section J. What we talk about when we talk about Family Guy. It is now very late. Or very early. Depending on where you are in the world and what brought you to this video, the quality of dark outside your window is either the dark of something ending or the dark of something about to begin. Both are fine. Both are the right time for theories. Here is what we have covered in the hours since this started. We have explored the possibility that the show's entire narrative is the constructed inner world of a man in a psychiatric facility who cannot survive the truth of what he has lost. We have followed the implication that the show's cruelties are the expression of grief that cannot be named directly, and its occasional warmths are the moments when the grief gives way to the love that produced it. We have looked at the possibility that everything we see is one child's subjective experience of the world around him, filtered through a developing consciousness that is simultaneously ordinary and extraordinary. We have examined what it would mean for Brian if his mind was placed in his body by external means, and what kind of life that would produce, and what kind of grief. We have spent time with Meg real time, the kind of time her situation deserves, and followed the theory of her function in her family to wherever it leads. We have looked at the impossible house and the uncanny geography of the town, and the chemical contamination theory and the incubus next door. We have visited purgatory and the CIA's simulation, and the children who know what the adults cannot see. We have found Brian's gun in the safety deposit box and sat with it for a while. We have watched Stewie look at the camera, and we have tried, at every turn, to ask not just what these theories say about the show, but what they say about us, about why we reach for these readings, about what we are looking for in the dark spaces of a story, about what it means to care enough about a fictional family to construct elaborate architectures of meaning around their lives. What it means, finally, is this. The Griffin family is not a real family. Nobody has argued otherwise. But the feelings they produce, the laughter, the discomfort, the occasional piercing recognition, the specific sadness of watching something you love deteriorate, those feelings are real. The way the show has mattered to the people who grew up with it is real. And the theories are the response of real feeling to a fictional text. The attempt to take what you feel seriously enough to ask why you feel it, to follow the feeling to its source, to find the story behind the story that explains why this particular show, out of all the animated comedies that have ever aired, got to so many people so deeply. The answer, the theories suggest, is that Family Guy has always been about more than what it appears to be about. That underneath the absurdism and the shock value and the casual brutality that its later seasons have leaned on, there is a story about grief and love and the impossible difficulty of being a person in a world that keeps taking things away, about the ways that families fail each other and keep trying anyway, about the specific underappreciated heroism of people like Meg, who absorb what they absorb and keep showing up, and the specific underappreciated tragedy of people like Brian, who see clearly and cannot act on what they see, and the specific underappreciated grace of people like Stewie, who love something enough to break every rule to keep it. This is what was hiding in the cartoon. You found it. Now sleep. End of complete script. Final estimated word count, approximately 30,500 words across all sections and expansion blocks. Expansion Section K. On the nature of fan theories themselves, why we do this. Before we close completely, there is one more thing worth saying, and it is about the practice of fan theory itself. Fan theories exist because stories are not finished when the creator finishes them. A story is not an object that sits still after it is made. It is a process, an ongoing interaction between the text and the people who encounter it. Every person who watches Family Guy brings themselves to the encounter, their own history, their own relationship with families and grief, and comedy, and the specific emotional texture of Rhode Island in an animated universe. They bring all of this to every episode, and what they get back from the text is shaped by what they brought. Different people get different things. The same person gets different things at different ages, at different moments in their life, depending on what they need the text to give them. Fan theories are the documentation of what specific people got from specific texts at specific moments. They are evidence of attention, of care, of the willingness to press on something until it yields something worth having. The best fan theories, like the best literary criticism, do not change the text. They reveal what was always in it, waiting for the right reader to find it. The Peter insanity theory was always in Family Guy. The evidence for it was always there in the way Meg is treated, in the impossible agelessness of the world, in the occasional flashes of genuine feeling that break through the comedy's surface. The theory did not invent this evidence. It found it. It assembled it. It offered a framework within which the evidence could be read as pointing somewhere, rather than simply as the accumulated inconsistencies of a long-running show made by fallible humans who did not always track their own. Continuity. This is what the best fan theories do. They offer a framework, a reading strategy, a way of organizing the material that makes more things meaningful and fewer things arbitrary. And the value of such a framework is not whether it accurately represents what the creators intended. It is whether it produces a richer, more interesting, more emotionally satisfying experience of the text. By that standard, every theory in this video earns its place. The Peter insanity theory transforms meaningless cruelty into structured grief. The Stewie perspective theory transforms internal inconsistency into a coherent account of subjective experience. The Brian human mind theory transforms a quirky premise into a portrait of displacement and longing. The scapegoat theory transforms Meg from a punchline into something much sadder and much more worth thinking about. The purgatory theory transforms the show's impossibly elastic reality into the coherent logic of a post-mortem space. The simulation theory transforms the show's randomness into the deliberate distraction of a constructed environment. The incubus theory transforms a sex joke character into something older and stranger and more worth looking at directly. All of these transformations make the show more. They add to it. They complicate it in ways that reward the complication. And the show, for all its faults, for all the ways it has declined from its early promise, has provided enough material to sustain all of them. This is not nothing. A show that provides enough material for this level of sustained, creative, emotionally serious engagement across 20-plus years of viewer attention has done something that most entertainment never manages. It has mattered. The Griffin family matters. Not in spite of the cruelty and the inconsistency and the long, sad decline of the show's quality. Because of all of those things too. Because the things that disappoint us are the things we cared about enough to be disappointed by. Because the theories we build are proportional to the love we had for the thing before it let us down. Because the most elaborate fan theories in history tend to be built around the stories that got to us most deeply when we were young and impressionable and watching television in someone's living room with no awareness that we were building a relationship with a fictional family that would last for decades. This is what tonight has been about. This is what 3 Hours in the Dark with Family Guy Theories is always about. At some level, that the humor and the strangeness and the specific flavor of the ASMR genre can make easy to lose sight of. It is about the love that produced the attention that produced the theories. It is about the family in the house with the yellow siding and the teal roof and the red door, and what they have meant to the people who have been watching them for as long as any of this has been on the air. They matter because you let them matter. That is the whole mechanism. That is all a story ever needs. Good night, truly. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about the things you care about with the depth you care about them. It is not a small thing. Script complete. Total estimated word count, approximately 31,000 plus words. A final word on the theories and their long shadow. There is something worth saying about the permanence of dark theories once they are encountered. Once you have read the Peter insanity theory, you cannot unread it. This is not a criticism. It is an observation about how certain ideas work, how they insert themselves into your relationship with a piece of fiction in a way that persists regardless of whether you consciously endorse the reading. You can decide the theory is wrong. You can decide it is not supported, that it is reading too much into too little, that it gives the show more credit for hidden intentionality than the show actually deserves. You can reach all of these conclusions and still find, the next time you watch an episode of Family Guy, that the theory is there in the room with you, shaping what you notice, making certain moments carry more weight than they did before, changing the color of the light through which you see the characters. This is what good theories do. Not prove things exactly, but change the quality of attention you bring to the material, make you a different kind of viewer than you were before. The theory does not have to be true in any literal or verifiable sense to do this work. It only has to be coherent enough to inhabit and precise enough in its fit with the material to feel like it is pointing at something rather than projecting onto nothing. Every theory in this video is precise in this way. Each one fits the material it claims to be reading with the specific, non-accidental quality of a reading that has been done carefully by someone who knows the source well. The scapegoat theory fits because the scapegoat dynamic the theory describes is actually visible in the show's treatment of Meg, not hidden or inferred but on the surface for anyone willing to look. The purgatory theory fits because the specific configurations of each character's situation in the show align with suspicious exactness with the configurations you would design if you were trying to confront each character with the specific failure their particular nature makes most available. The insanity theory fits because the specific distortions of the show's reality, the things it exaggerates, the things it elides, the things it makes impossible correspond with disturbing precision to the distortions a grieving mind would be expected to produce. Good theories fit, and the fitting itself is a kind of proof, not proof that the creator intended the reading, but proof that the material sustains it. Proof that the show is complex enough, and specific enough, and human enough in its concerns to support these readings. This is the higher compliment. Better than saying the show intended to be this than to say, the show is rich enough that careful attention finds this in it, regardless of intention. You have been paying careful attention tonight. That is worth something. What you find in the dark, when you go looking carefully, is usually more than you expected. The theories found more in Family Guy than most critics of the show ever went looking for. They found grief and love, and the specific architecture of minds protecting themselves from unbearable reality. They found a scapegoat carrying the weight of a family's dysfunction. They found a dog who may have been a person. They found a baby who may have been an overseer. They found a neighbor who may have been something very old and very persistent. They found a house that refuses to hold still, and a town that refuses to map to any real location, and a zip code that leads nowhere. And they found, underneath all of that, the thing that was always at the center of it: a family trying to hold together, failing, trying again, failing again, trying anyway because the alternative to trying is losing each other, and losing each other is the thing that cannot be survived. The Griffin family is trying. They have always been trying. Even at their worst, even when Peter is at his cruelest and Brian at his most self-serving and Stewie at his most calculating, there is a current running underneath the worst of it that is something like love, or the remnant of love, or the memory of what love felt like when it was simpler, before everything got complicated by all the years of failing at it. The show knows this about itself. The fan theories know it too. You know it now if you did not before. Sleep. And if you cannot sleep, then let the knowing be company enough.